Have you ever wondered what happens when Rick's scientific genius meets the strangest dimensions in the multiverse? Not the ones we've seen on the show, but the truly bizarre ones he keeps to himself. Tonight, we're exploring the oddest corners of Rick and Morty's universe in a way that'll ease your mind into sleep. These aren't your typical adventures. These are the dimensions so strange that even Rick had to stop and take a nap. Rick Sanchez opens his eyes slowly, the way you do when you're not quite sure where you are. This isn't his garage. It's not his bedroom. It's not even the bathroom floor where he sometimes passes out. The space around him has a quality that's hard to pin down. Familiar in some ways, but totally foreign in others. Rick sits up and immediately notices something weird. His body rises a little too easily, like gravity decided to take a coffee break. "What the hell?" he mutters, patting down his lab coat. No portal gun, no flask. Nothing but the clothes on his back and a growing sense that something very unusual is happening. Rick isn't drunk this time. His head is clear, his thoughts precise. The last thing he remembers is falling asleep at his workbench after a particularly exhausting adventure with Morty. Now he's somewhere else entirely. The space around Rick stretches out in all directions. It's not exactly a landscape, more like a visual field that shifts and changes as he turns his head. Colors blend into each other without clear boundaries, moving from deep purples to electric blues and soft greens. The ground beneath him isn't solid either. It's more like a suggestion of a surface, translucent and barely visible. Rick looks down at his feet and confirms what he's already feeling. He's hovering about 6 inches above whatever passes for ground in this place. Not falling, not flying, just floating. This isn't his first weird dimension by a long shot, but it's definitely one he has no memory of visiting before. That's concerning. Rick Sanchez keeps meticulous mental records of every dimension he's ever entered. "Portal gun's gone," Rick says to himself, his voice sounding strangely muffled in the space around him. No memory of coming here. No hangover. So either someone drugged me and dumped me in a dimension I've never seen before, or… Rick pauses, the scientific part of his brain already working on possible explanations. Or I've been sleepwalking between dimensions. The idea is absurd, even to Rick. His portal gun requires conscious operation. There's no way he could have used it in his sleep. Yet here he is, in a place that defies explanation. Rick decides to test his surroundings. He reaches out toward what looks like a floating structure, something between a rock and a cloud, and gives it a gentle push. His body responds by drifting slowly in the opposite direction. "Interesting," Rick mutters as he floats backward. Action and reaction still work, but gravity's optional. He pushes against another object and changes direction again. The movement feels peaceful, almost therapeutic. There's no resistance, no friction to slow him down. He continues to drift until he decides to stop, which happens almost instantly when he thinks about stopping. Rick notices something else, too. Despite being in a completely unknown environment without his portal gun or any weapons, he doesn't feel the usual spike of anxiety or irritation. Instead, there's a strange sense of calm washing over him. It's not chemical. He knows what that feels like. This is something else, something built into the fabric of this place. "Wait a minute," Rick says, focusing on his right hand. He thinks about moving it upward, and without any muscle movement, his hand rises. He thinks about turning around, and his body rotates smoothly. It's responding to my thoughts, not just my actions. The scientific part of Rick's brain kicks into high gear, analyzing this phenomenon from every angle. No known physical force works this way. There's no technology attached to him that could be reading his thoughts. This dimension itself must operate on different principles than the ones he's used to navigating. As Rick experiments with movement, he notices the colors around him shifting more dramatically. When he feels a surge of curiosity, the space around him pulses with bright yellows. When a brief moment of frustration hits him, the colors darken to rich reds and oranges. It's not just responding to his thoughts, it's responding to his emotions. "This can't be real," Rick mutters, now floating in a lazy spin. "This has to be a dream." But if it's a dream… He pinches himself hard on the arm. The pain is sharp and real. Not a normal dream anyway. Rick thinks about the possibility that he's encountered a dimension that operates on dream logic. He's seen stranger things in his travels. Dimensions where time runs backward, where living beings are made of pure sound, where the laws of thermodynamics take holidays. Why not a dimension where thought directly influences physical reality? As this idea forms in Rick's mind, the space around him seems to become more defined, as if responding to his growing understanding. The shifting colors organize themselves into patterns that almost resemble a landscape. Rolling hills, a distant horizon, even structures that could be buildings if you squint hard enough. Rick decides to test his theory. He concentrates on the idea of moving forward quickly. His body accelerates smoothly, carrying him over the dreamlike landscape at increasing speed. When he thinks about stopping, he does so instantly, with no momentum carrying him forward. The normal laws of physics don't apply here, at least not consistently. So it's movement by intention, not physical force, Rick concludes, now feeling more fascinated than confused. This dimension doesn't just have optional gravity, it has thought-responsive physics. As this realization solidifies in Rick's mind, the sky above him, if you can call it a sky, shifts dramatically from deep purple to a brilliant turquoise. The change seems to reflect his emotional state, which has moved from confusion to scientific fascination. Rick experiments further, thinking about moving up, down, spinning in circles. Each thought translates immediately into action. There's no need for the physical process of walking or jumping, or even the muscular action of pushing against objects. Pure intention is enough. This place is responding to me, Rick says, watching as ripples of color spread out from him like waves on a pond. Not just to my movements, but to what I'm thinking and feeling. Rick has encountered sensitive environments before, planets with sentient atmospheres, pocket dimensions that reflect moods. But this is different. The response is immediate and precise, as if the very fabric of this place is designed to interact with consciousness rather than matter. As Rick accepts his situation, allowing himself to relax into this strange reality, the environment around him becomes even more responsive. The colors flow more harmoniously, the shapes become more distinct, while still maintaining their dreamlike quality. He notices that when he thinks about specific objects, the shapes nearby sometimes seem to suggest those objects, like clouds that resemble whatever you imagine them to be. So I'm in a dimension that operates on dream logic, responds to thoughts and emotions, and lets me move through pure intention, Rick summarizes to himself. And somehow I got here while I was asleep, interdimensional sleepwalking. The concept should be alarming, but in this place, even concern feels muted and manageable. Rick finds himself wondering if he's visited before in his sleep and simply doesn't remember. Perhaps this dimension only opens itself to sleeping minds, pulling in dreamers from across the multiverse. Rick looks down at his hand again, concentrating on it. In response, it begins to glow slightly, emitting a soft blue light that spreads up his arm. He's not just moving through this space, he's becoming part of it, learning its rules, adapting to its nature. Not bad, Rick admits, looking around at the ever-shifting landscape that now seems to breathe in time with him. As far as accidental dimension hopping goes, this is actually pretty chill. The sky pulses once more, this time with warm golden light that spreads across the entire visual field. It's responding to his acceptance, mirroring his growing comfort with this bizarre situation. Rick Sanchez, who typically hates losing control, finds himself surprisingly okay with drifting through this thought-responsive reality. As Rick continues to float through this dimension, something weird starts happening in the space around him. Small objects begin to form. Not just appear, but actually construct themselves, molecule by molecule right before his eyes. First, it's just a tiny speck of something, like dust catching sunlight. Then it stretches, grows, and takes on color until Rick sees a miniature version of Morty hovering about a foot away from his face. What the hell? Rick reaches for the tiny Morty. It's only about 3 inches tall, perfectly detailed, right down to the worried expression and yellow shirt. The figure doesn't move or speak, it just floats there like a highly detailed action figure. Rick pokes it with his finger and finds it solid, not some kind of hologram or illusion. Before Rick can examine it further, more objects start forming around him. A small version of his spaceship materializes to his left, spinning slowly like a display model. Then comes a bizarre alien creature Rick remembers fighting on a planet in dimension C137, the one with tentacles coming out of what most species would consider a mouth. Each object forms completely, hovers for a minute or two, then slowly dissolves back into the atmosphere. "Wait a second," Rick mutters, staring at the miniature spaceship as it starts to fade. "I was just thinking about that adventure with Morty, and then the space cruiser, and that tentacle-faced asshole from Gorlak 9. Rick focuses his thoughts deliberately on his screwdriver, the one with the special attachment he uses for adjusting his portal gun. A moment later, the space in front of him shimmers and an exact replica of the screwdriver forms in the air. Rick grabs it, turning it over in his hands. It has weight and substance. He could probably use it if he needed to. "Well, this is interesting," Rick says, watching as the screwdriver starts to lose its solidity about a minute later. He quickly thinks about his flask, the one he keeps in his lab coat, and sure enough, a perfect copy materializes near his right shoulder. Rick grabs it and unscrews the cap. He sniffs the contents. "Damn, even got the smell right. That's impressive." Rick takes an experimental sip. The liquid burns just like his favorite whiskey, though he notices the flask dissolves faster after he interacts with it. He tries thinking about something more complex, the unified field equation he's been working on back in his garage. The air in front of him shimmers more intensely this time, and mathematical symbols begin to appear, arranging themselves into the complex equation. The symbols glow faintly and hover in a three-dimensional array that Rick can walk through and examine from different angles. "So this dimension materializes thoughts," Rick says, watching as the equation slowly rotates. "Not just visual memory, but concepts too. Interesting limitations, though. The objects seem temporary, and they dissolve faster when I interact with them." Rick continues experimenting, thinking about different items. A simple cube, a bird from Earth, the interdimensional cable box he built. Each thought quickly manifests into a physical object that orbits around him like a satellite. Soon, Rick has a small collection of objects floating around him, some staying longer than others, all eventually dissolving back into the atmosphere. "I'm basically thinking things into existence," Rick mutters, watching as an alien weapon he once designed forms molecule by molecule. But they don't last. Temporary manifestations with decreasing stability when manipulated. He tries to use the alien weapon to shoot at a distant shape, but nothing happens when he pulls the trigger. And no actual function beyond form. The complex internal mechanisms aren't working. Rick's curiosity takes a natural turn toward the dangerous. He wonders what would happen if he thought about something extremely hazardous, like an antimatter bomb or a collapsing neutron star. Would the dimension actually create something that could destroy itself? He hesitates, then decides against the experiment. Even Rick Sanchez has some sense of self-preservation. Instead, he focuses on a slightly safer test. He concentrates on the concept of a portal. Not specifically his portal gun, but the swirling green doorway it creates. The air in front of him shimmers differently this time, struggling to form something that isn't a concrete object. Eventually, a green disk appears, but it's clearly not functional. More like a flat glowing painting of a portal than an actual tear in space-time. "So there are limits," Rick observes. "Can't manifest actual dimensional gateways or energy states, just physical approximations of them." As Rick continues to test the boundaries of this strange ability, he notices something moving in the distance. He squints, trying to make out what it is through the hazy, color-shifting atmosphere. About 50 yards away, there appears to be another entity. Not human, but definitely conscious. And surrounding this creature is its own constellation of objects, bizarre shapes Rick doesn't recognize, probably from the creature's own thoughts. "I'm not alone here," Rick realizes, looking around more carefully. Now that he's paying attention, he can make out several distant figures, each with their own orbiting cloud of manifestations. Some are humanoid, others completely alien, but all seem to exist in the same state he does, floating freely, surrounded by physical representations of their thoughts. This dimension isn't just responding to Rick. It's a shared space where thoughts take visible form for everyone present. Rick watches as one distant figure, something that resembles a giant jellyfish, creates what looks like an entire cityscape in miniature around itself. Another entity, more humanoid but definitely not human, generates what appear to be tools or weapons that orbit it in a tight formation. So everyone here gets their own little thought bubble, Rick muses. Private but visible to others. Kind of like a physical Twitter feed you can't turn off. Rick wonders if he can approach one of these entities, maybe communicate with them. But as he tries to move in their direction, he notices the distance doesn't seem to change. The physics of this place aren't just strange in terms of gravity. Spatial relationships don't work normally either. While contemplating this, Rick absent-mindedly thinks about Morty again. Not just the simplified version from earlier, but a more detailed recollection of his grandson. This time, the manifestation forms more elaborately. It's a scene rather than a single figure. Morty nervously helping Rick in the garage, asking questions, dropping tools. The scene plays out silently like a holographic movie before dissolving. This is more than just objects, Rick says, watching the scene fade. It's pulling complete memories, playing them back. Rick realizes the implications of this. In this dimension, his mind is essentially inside out. Everything he thinks becomes briefly visible to anyone who might be watching. For someone as intensely private as Rick Sanchez, this is disturbing. His thoughts, memories, plans, fears, all potentially on display. But there's an upside too. This dimension lets Rick literally see what's on his mind, creating a visual map of his thinking processes that even he isn't always conscious of. The arrangement of objects, which thoughts last longer or form more vividly, it's all data about his own mental processes. Rick glances again at the distant entities with their own thought manifestations. He wonders what insights they might gain from seeing their thoughts made physical. Do they come here intentionally for that purpose? Is this dimension some kind of therapeutic space where beings confront their own minds in a literal way? More objects continue to form around Rick. Tools he's invented, people he's known, places he's visited. Each manifestation provides a brief window into Rick's mental landscape, forming a three-dimensional cognitive map around him. It's an externalized representation of the genius mind that's usually locked inside his skull, now temporarily visible to anyone who might be watching. A physical manifestation space, Rick says, watching as a perfect miniature replica of his garage workshop forms beside him, turning the abstract into the concrete. As Rick hovers in this strange dimension, surrounded by the physical embodiments of his thoughts, he realizes he's experiencing something truly unique, a place where the boundary between mind and matter breaks down, where the internal becomes external, where thoughts become things. And based on the other entities he can see in the distance, each with their own cloud of manifestations, this experience isn't just for him. It's a shared space where consciousness itself becomes visible. Rick stares at the distant figures for a while, each surrounded by their bizarre thought manifestations. His curiosity gets the better of him, and he decides to try approaching one of them. He concentrates on moving toward a particularly interesting entity, one whose cloud of thought objects seems more organized than chaotic. As Rick focuses his intention on movement, he finds himself drifting toward the figure, closing the distance that previously seemed unchangeable. The closer Rick gets, the more familiar the entity appears. It's roughly humanoid, but with bright purple skin and 3 sets of eyes arranged vertically on its face. Rick's eyes widen with recognition. "No way," he mutters as he comes within speaking distance. "Zixler? From the Garblovian cluster?" The purple alien turns all 6 eyes toward Rick, blinking them in sequence, a gesture Rick remembers as the equivalent of a smile in their species. "Rick Sanchez," the alien says, its voice somehow both inside Rick's head and existing as actual sound waves. "It's been quite some time." "Yeah, about 200 years by my count," Rick says, surprised by the casual greeting. "Last time I saw you, we were running from those security drones on Targathon Prime after stealing that quantum stabilizer." "Ah, yes, that was an amusing adventure," Zixler responds, seeming completely comfortable with their current surreal surroundings. "You seem confused, old friend. Is this your first conscious visit to the thought planes?" "Thought planes? Is that what this place is called?" Rick asks, glancing around at the shifting colors and floating objects. "And what do you mean, conscious visit?" You saying I've been here before? Zixler makes a sound that might be laughter. Many times, Rick Sanchez, as have countless beings across the multiverse. This dimension exists at the intersection of consciousness and dream. Most visitors arrive during sleep cycles and retain no memory upon returning to their physical forms. Rick processes this information, watching as a new thought object forms next to Zixler, a complex molecular structure that Rick recognizes as a rare compound they once synthesized together. So what? This is some kind of shared dream dimension? And we just randomly end up here when we're asleep? Not randomly, no, Zixler corrects, gesturing with one of its 4 arms. The thought planes draw in minds that are particularly active during sleep. Creative minds. Problem-solving minds. Your mind, Rick Sanchez, has likely been visiting for decades. This explanation hits Rick with unexpected weight. He's had countless nights of going to bed stuck on a scientific problem, only to wake up with the solution seemingly appearing from nowhere. He always attributed it to his genius brain working things out subconsciously. But what if it was this place? If I've been here before, why don't I remember any of it? Rick asks, watching as a miniature version of his first portal gun forms in the air beside him, something he was thinking about without realizing it. The membrane between waking consciousness and dream consciousness is designed to be mostly one way, Zixler explains. Most beings forget their time here. It serves a purpose. Rick looks around more carefully now, noticing other dreamers floating in the distance. Some are human-shaped, others completely alien. Beings with no physical resemblance to any life form Rick has encountered before. Each interacts with their own unique cloud of thought manifestations in different ways. One octopus-like creature seems to be arranging its thoughts into intricate patterns. Another entity, composed entirely of what looks like blue light, rapidly cycles through thousands of small manifestations per second. So everyone here is asleep right now in their home dimensions, Rick asks, trying to make sense of this collective experience. Most are, Zixler confirms. Though some more experienced travelers have learned to access the thought planes through deep meditation. I myself have practiced this technique for centuries. Rick watches as a particularly bizarre entity in the distance creates a manifestation that looks like an entire solar system in miniature. And we're all just floating around thinking at each other. What's the point? Zixler's 6 eyes blink in that smile-like sequence again. The thought planes serve a greater purpose than mere chance encounters, Rick Sanchez. This dimension functions as a problem solver for the subconscious mind. The externalization of thought into temporarily physical form allows for unique processing capabilities. Hold up, Rick says, raising an eyebrow. You're saying this place is basically therapy for sleeping brains? In simplistic terms, yes, Zixler nods. Many of the greatest scientific and creative breakthroughs across civilizations have originated here, though the waking minds rarely remember the process, only the solution. Rick thinks about this, watching as more of his own thought objects form and dissolve around him. Some are clearly related to projects he's currently working on. Modifications to his portal gun, a defense system for the Smith house, a cure for the common cold he's designing just to prove he can. But others surprise him. Beth as a child, a younger version of himself, planets he's destroyed. So our subconscious minds come here to work through personal crap and solve problems while we sleep, Rick summarizes. And then we wake up with no memory of being here, but sometimes with solutions to whatever we were stuck on. Precisely, Zixler says. The thought planes are especially effective for processing what you might call inner conflicts. The absurd scenarios that often unfold here allow the mind to approach problems from angles impossible in waking reality. Rick watches a nearby humanoid figure whose thoughts are forming into increasingly bizarre mechanical contraptions. The dreamer seems frustrated, trying to solve some kind of engineering problem through increasingly ridiculous solutions. That guy's getting nowhere fast, Rick observes. Perhaps from your perspective, Zixler says. But his subconscious is exploring possibilities that his waking mind would reject immediately as too absurd. One of those absurd solutions may contain the seed of insight he needs. This makes a weird kind of sense to Rick. Some of his own greatest inventions came from ideas so seemingly ridiculous that he almost dismissed them. like using isotopes from a dying star to power a battery that could last hundreds of years. An idea that came to him one morning right after waking up. So if I've been here before, a lot of times apparently, what kind of problems has my subconscious been trying to solve? Rick wonders, more to himself than to Zixler. The alien regards Rick with what might be compassion. Perhaps your next visits will reveal more insights. The thought planes exist outside normal temporal flow. We experience time differently here. Rick looks at his own cloud of thought manifestations more critically now. There's a pattern to them that he hadn't noticed before. Recurring themes and objects that suggest his mind keeps returning to the same issues. His family appears frequently. Various versions of Morty, Beth at different ages. Even Jerry makes occasional appearances, much to Rick's annoyance. Great, so my subconscious is stuck on family drama. How cliché, Rick mutters. The mind focuses on what it needs to resolve, Zixler says simply. Even the most brilliant intellects across the multiverse cannot escape their emotional processes. Rick is about to make a sarcastic comment when he notices something unusual forming in his thought cloud. A complex mathematical equation he's been struggling with for months. As it forms in physical space, he can see the solution approach that had eluded him. The physical manifestation makes the relationship between variables clear in a way he couldn't see when the equation existed only in his mind. Well, that's actually pretty useful, Rick admits, studying the equation before it dissolves. Many find it so, Zixler agrees. Though the solutions and insights often fade from memory upon waking, they remain in the subconscious, influencing future thought patterns. Rick takes another look around at this vast, strange dimension filled with dreamers from across the multiverse, each working through their own problems in their own way. So I'm just one more sleeping brain in a dimension full of them, solving problems I won't even remember solving. For now, Zixler says cryptically, though those who become aware of the thought planes often find ways to retain more from their visits. Rick considers what problems his subconscious might be working to solve by bringing him here repeatedly. What conflicts need resolution? What scientific breakthroughs might be waiting just beyond his conscious grasp? And more importantly, can he learn to remember these visits when he wakes up? After talking with Zixler, Rick decides he needs to understand the rules of this place better. If he's been visiting this dimension repeatedly without remembering it, he might as well figure out how it works. Rick's scientific mind can't help but test boundaries. It's just what he does whenever he encounters a new dimension. All right, let's see what this place can handle, Rick mutters to himself as he floats away from Zixler toward an empty area of the thought planes. He starts with something simple. What happens if he tries to create something impossibly large? Rick concentrates on the image of a planet. Not just any planet, but a gas giant bigger than Jupiter. The air around him shimmers intensely, struggling to manifest something of that scale. Instead of a full-sized planet, what forms is a miniature version about the size of a beach ball. Detailed and accurate, but nowhere near the actual scale Rick was imagining. Interesting, Rick says, poking at the tiny gas giant. Size limitation makes sense. Can't have dreamers creating full-size stars and black holes in here. Rick tries again, this time thinking about something incredibly complex. The complete schematics for an interdimensional portal device, with every component and connection visualized simultaneously. The air shimmers differently this time, producing a visualization that keeps shifting and changing, never quite settling into a stable form. Parts of the schematic appear clearly while others remain blurry or incomplete. After about 30 seconds, the whole thing dissolves much faster than his previous manifestations. So, complexity is also limited, Rick observes. The more detailed the thought, the less stable the manifestation. Rick notices something else too. While he's been experimenting, the colors around him have been shifting at different rates. Sometimes the environment changes rapidly. Other times it seems almost frozen in place. He pulls out a thought manifestation of his watch and observes it for a while, then creates another one a minute later. Comparing the two timepieces, he sees they show different times, as if they're experiencing time at different rates. Time isn't constant here either, Rick notes. It flows differently depending on something. He tries to identify what might be affecting the time flow. When he feels excited or engaged, Time seems to move faster in the environment around him. When he's calm or focused on a single thought, time slows down. Time is tied to emotional or mental states. More activity equals faster time flow. Rick decides to test another aspect of this dimension. He creates a simple object, a baseball, and then tries to use it in a way that would be harmful. He throws it as hard as he can at another distant dreamer. The ball travels about halfway to the target before simply dissolving into nothing. Rick tries again with different objects and different targets, always with the same result. Safety feature, Rick concludes. Can't harm other dreamers with thought manifestations. He tries manifesting something harmful to himself, a knife, and attempts to cut his finger. The knife dissolves the moment it touches his skin. Self-harm protection, too. Interesting. As Rick continues testing, he notices that some of his thoughts create more stable and vivid manifestations than others. His scientific ideas, formulas, inventions, technological concepts tend to form quickly, but fade just as fast. But when he accidentally thinks about Morty in danger, the manifestation forms with intense clarity and lasts much longer before dissolving. Rick tries an experiment. He deliberately thinks about Beth as a child, a memory with strong emotional resonance for him. The manifestation that forms is incredibly detailed. He can see individual strands of her hair, the pattern on her dress, even the small scrape on her knee from when she fell off her bike. The manifestation glows with a warm light and remains stable for several minutes. Next, he thinks about a complex mathematical formula he's been working on, something intellectually challenging but emotionally neutral. The formula appears but with less definition and stability, dissolving after only about 30 seconds. Emotional thoughts create stronger manifestations than intellectual ones, Rick says to himself. The more feeling attached to the thought, the more real it becomes here. This realization bothers Rick a little. He's always prided himself on his intellect over emotions. But in this dimension, his feelings create more reality than his thoughts. The implication isn't lost on him. Rick also begins to notice something strange about communication here. When Zixler spoke to him earlier, it wasn't just through sound. Rick received the alien's thoughts directly, experiencing them as both words and images simultaneously. He tries an experiment, approaching another dreamer, a humanoid figure with blue skin, and thinks a greeting toward them without speaking. The blue figure turns immediately, responding with a mental image that conveys recognition and acknowledgement. No words are exchanged, but communication happens anyway. Thought-based communication, Rick notes. Direct mind-to-mind contact without the limitations of language. As Rick continues exploring, he notices more rules that don't match standard physics. Causality works differently here. Sometimes effects precede causes. He thinks about dropping a thought manifestation ball, and it hits the ground before he actually releases it. Temporal causality is fluid, Rick observes. Intention can override sequential time. One of the strangest rules Rick discovers involves the intersection of different dreamers' thought manifestations. When two thought objects from different minds come into contact, they don't simply pass through each other or bounce off. Instead, they merge and transform into something new that contains elements of both original thoughts. Rick watches as one of his manifested tools drifts into contact with an object created by a distant dreamer. The two items swirl together, creating a hybrid tool that neither of them individually imagined. Thought fusion, Rick says. Collaborative creation through intersection. After hours of testing, though time measurement feels unreliable here, Rick has developed a mental list of this dimension's strange rules. 1. Gravity is optional and movement works through intention rather than physical force. Size and complexity of manifestations are limited. 3. Time flows at variable rates depending on mental state. Thought manifestations cannot cause harm to any dreamer. 5. Emotional thoughts create stronger manifestations than intellectual ones. Mix. Communication occurs through direct thought transfer, along with spoken words. 11. Causality is fluid and sometimes reversed. 8. Thought manifestations from different dreamers can merge into hybrid creations. 9. The environment responds to emotional states by changing colors and patterns. 10. Objects have temporary physics. They can be interacted with but eventually dissolve. Rick floats in place, processing everything he's learned. He's a scientist who's spent his life mastering the rules of countless dimensions, bending them to his will through technology and intelligence. This place operates differently than any he's encountered before, but that doesn't mean it can't be understood and utilized. If I can master these rules, Rick thinks, I could use this dimension just like any other. He imagines the possibilities: collaborative problem-solving with minds from across the multiverse, a testing ground for ideas without real-world consequences, maybe even a way to process the emotional baggage he usually drowns in alcohol. The colors around Rick shift to deep purples and blues, responding to his calculating thoughts. He realizes that understanding this dimension might allow him to navigate it with intention, rather than just floating around randomly. Maybe he could even learn to remember these visits when he wakes up. Every dimension has patterns, Rick says to himself as he begins to see the underlying logic of the thought planes, even ones that seem like pure chaos. This place doesn't follow the physical laws Rick is used to manipulating, but it follows its own consistent internal logic, dream logic, where thoughts have weight, emotions have form, and reality responds to the mind rather than the other way around. As Rick continues floating through the thought planes, he notices movement in his peripheral vision that's different from the distant dreamers. Something glides through the colorful atmosphere with purpose and direction, weaving between the clusters of thought manifestations. At first glance, it looks like just another thought object, semi-transparent and glowing faintly, but its movement pattern is too deliberate to be random. Rick adjusts his position to get a better look. The entity resembles a cross between a jellyfish and a cloud, with tendrils of light that pulse and shift as it moves. Unlike the thought manifestations that orbit around dreamers, this creature exists independently, moving with clear intention through the dimension. Its body appears made of the same semi-transparent material as the thought objects, but more cohesive and stable. "What are you supposed to be?" Rick asks, as the creature drifts closer to him. The entity doesn't respond verbally. Instead, Rick feels a series of images projected directly into his mind, abstract patterns that somehow convey meaning without words. The sensation is similar to the thought communication he experienced with other dreamers, but more refined and precise. Rick receives impressions of age, permanence, and purpose. The creature isn't just passing through, it belongs here. The mental images suggest that this entity is as native to this dimension as Rick is to his garage back on Earth. Rick tries communicating back, focusing on a question about the creature's nature. The response comes as a flood of imagery showing countless thought manifestations slowly coalescing over time, gaining consciousness, forming intention. "You evolved from thoughts?" Rick asks, fascinated by this concept. The creature pulses with light in what seems like affirmation. More images flow into Rick's mind, eons of dreamers visiting this dimension, leaving behind residual thought energy that gradually accumulated and organized itself into conscious entities. The creature approaches one of Rick's thought manifestations, a complex molecular structure he'd been considering earlier, and gently adjusts its configuration, bringing certain atoms into clearer focus. Rick immediately sees a more efficient arrangement he hadn't considered before. "You're helping me," Rick observes, watching as the creature moves to another of his thought objects and makes similar subtle adjustments. Rick receives another series of mental images showing these entities throughout the thought planes, interacting with dreamers' manifestations, maintaining the balance of the dimension, preventing thought objects from becoming too chaotic or unstable. The creatures serve as caretakers of this vast dream space, ensuring it remains functional for the countless minds that visit during sleep. As Rick watches, he notices more of these beings gliding through the dimension. They move between dreamer clusters, sometimes adjusting thought manifestations, sometimes absorbing dissolving ones, occasionally creating new patterns from existing thoughts. Their purpose becomes clearer to Rick. They're maintaining the ecology of this thought-based dimension, preventing it from becoming overwhelmed by the mental energy constantly flowing in from sleeping minds across the multiverse. "So you're like psychic janitors," Rick says, watching one creature absorb a fading thought manifestation. "Cleaning up after our messy brains." The initial creature that approached Rick continues following him as he floats through the dimension, observing his thought clouds with apparent interest. When Rick creates particularly complex or unusual manifestations, the creature draws closer, studying them intently. Rick notices that his more emotional thoughts, especially those involving his family, attract the creature's attention more than his scientific calculations. "What, you've never seen a guy with family issues before?" Rick jokes, watching as the creature hovers near a manifestation of Beth as a teenager. The response is a series of mental images showing the creature interacting with Rick's thought manifestations on many previous occasions, times when Rick was asleep and unaware of his presence in this dimension. "You've seen me here before," Rick realizes. "Probably lots of times." The creature pulses in confirmation. Rick receives impressions of numerous visits, countless thought patterns, recurring themes in his manifestations that he wasn't aware of himself. The creature has been observing Rick's dream self for what seems like years, cataloging his thought patterns, occasionally adjusting his manifestations in subtle ways. Rick tests the creature's intentions by deliberately creating a chaotic thought manifestation, a jumbled mess of machinery parts with no logical organization. The creature approaches this manifestation and begins rearranging the components, not into a random pattern, but into a more coherent form that actually makes mechanical sense. It's not just cleaning up the chaos, it's finding order within it. "You're not just maintaining this place," Rick says, watching the creature work. "You're helping us organize our thoughts." The creature pulses in response, and Rick receives images of dreamers arriving confused and leaving with clarity, often without conscious awareness of the transformation. As Rick continues observing, the creature begins doing something unexpected with his thought manifestations. Instead of just making minor adjustments to individual objects, it starts moving them into specific arrangements relative to each other. At first, the pattern seems random, but as more objects are positioned, Rick begins to see connections forming between concepts he hadn't previously associated. The creature positions a manifestation of Rick's portal gun near a childhood memory of Rick's first chemistry set, then adds a recent calculation about dimensional barriers, creating a triangular relationship between the objects. Rick stares at this arrangement, suddenly seeing a new approach to a technical problem he'd been struggling with. "You're not just organizing my thoughts," Rick says. "You're showing me connections I missed." More of Rick's thought manifestations are gathered and arranged by the creature, forming increasingly complex patterns that reveal relationships between seemingly unrelated concepts. Scientific problems link to emotional memories, technological designs connect to philosophical questions, personal relationships tie to cosmic principles. Rick watches in fascination as the creature essentially creates a map of his mind's hidden connections. "This is some seriously advanced therapy," Rick mutters, recognizing patterns in his own thinking that he'd never noticed before. The creature continues its work, seemingly pleased by Rick's understanding. Through another series of mental images, the creature reveals more about its purpose. These entities don't just maintain the dimension. They actively help dreamers process their subconscious material, making connections and arrangements that guide sleepers toward realizations without direct intervention. They're like psychic therapists, using the externalized thoughts to help minds heal and grow in ways that feel natural and self-directed. The creature working with Rick's thoughts seems particularly interested in recurring patterns involving his family, especially Morty. It arranges manifestations to highlight Rick's protective impulses alongside his fear of attachment, his pride in Morty's growth conflicting with his anxiety about Morty's independence. Rick watches this psychological mapping with a mixture of scientific fascination and emotional discomfort. "All right, that's enough of the family therapy session," Rick says, though he can't deny the insights revealed by these arrangements. The creature recedes slightly but continues observing, projecting a sense of patience that suggests it's been working with Rick's thought patterns for a very long time. In a final series of mental images, the creature shows Rick something surprising: patterns in his thought manifestations that have appeared consistently across all his visits to this dimension, stretching back further than Rick would have imagined. Core concerns, fears, hopes, and ideas that have remained consistent despite the chaos of Rick's adventures through the multiverse. Rick sees the true constants in his own mind laid bare. his love for his family buried beneath layers of cynicism, his search for meaning disguised as nihilistic science, his loneliness masked by independence. "So you've basically been my dream therapist without me knowing it," Rick concludes, watching as the creature gently rearranges one final set of thought manifestations into a pattern that feels strangely complete. The creature pulses once more in confirmation before drifting away to tend to another dreamer's thoughts, leaving Rick floating in the thought planes with a new understanding of both this dimension and his own mind. Rick floats through the thought planes, finally getting comfortable with the strange physics of this dream dimension. The colors around him respond more harmoniously to his movements now, and he's even starting to enjoy the weightless sensation of thought-propelled motion. But as his guard lowers, something unexpected happens. The thought manifestations orbiting around him begin to change. "What the hell?" Rick mutters as he notices a small object forming near his left shoulder. It's not the portal gun component he was considering, or the molecular structure he was trying to solve. Instead, it's a child science fair ribbon, specifically the blue ribbon Beth won in 2nd grade for her horse heart project. The memory is so specific and so personal that Rick immediately tries to dismiss it, but instead of dissolving, the ribbon grows more solid. More personal objects begin to form around him without his conscious direction. A bottle of the wine he shared with his wife on their anniversary. A screwdriver he used to help Beth fix her bicycle. The first crude portal device he built, complete with the burn mark from when it exploded and nearly killed him. Each object appears with perfect clarity, hovering around Rick like satellites, rotating slowly so he can see every detail. "No, no, no," Rick says, trying to focus on complex mathematical equations to override these personal thoughts. A few equations do appear, glowing faintly among the personal artifacts, but they don't replace the memories. They just join them, creating an increasingly crowded orbit of thoughts around Rick's floating form. Rick tries to physically swat away a manifestation of his wedding ring, but his hand passes through it, and the ring grows brighter in response to his attempt to dismiss it. "Oh, that's just great," Rick grumbles. "The one time I can't get rid of sentimental garbage." A small manifestation of Beth as a child forms directly in front of Rick. She's about 7 years old, smiling up at him with that gap-toothed grin from the summer they built a spaceship from junkyard parts. The detail is incredible. Rick can see the grease smudge on her cheek, the sparkle in her eyes that showed her intelligence even then. The manifestation doesn't move or speak, but its presence is painfully vivid. Next comes a figure Rick hasn't allowed himself to fully remember in years: his wife, Diane. Her manifestation forms with such clarity that Rick physically recoils. He can see the exact shade of her blonde hair, the pattern of freckles across her nose, the way her left eyebrow arched slightly higher than her right. The sight hits Rick like a physical blow. "This dimension is really starting to piss me off," Rick mutters, trying to focus on literally anything else. Spaceship designs, alien languages, the recipe for his favorite mixed drink. But each new thought just adds to the cloud without replacing the personal memories. Various versions of Morty begin appearing as well. Morty frightened, Morty brave, Morty angry at Rick, Morty trusting Rick despite all evidence suggesting he shouldn't. Each version represents a different adventure, a different moment in their complicated relationship. Rick watches as the Mortys orbit around him, a physical reminder of how many times he's put his grandson in danger, and how many times Morty has somehow survived. Rick notices something strange about these personal manifestations. They behave differently than his scientific thoughts. When Rick manifests a mathematical formula or invention schematic, it appears in monochrome, static, and stable. But these emotional manifestations pulse with color, some even emitting soft sounds. The manifestation of Beth hums faintly with the lullaby Rick used to sing to her. His wife's image radiates warm gold light that fluctuates with Rick's heartbeat. A manifestation of the moment Rick first held baby Morty glows with a soft blue light that brightens whenever Rick looks directly at it. The emotional significance is visible, Rick realizes. These things are literally color-coded by how much they matter to me. This revelation doesn't improve Rick's mood. Having his inner emotional life mapped out in vivid color around him feels invasive. even if the only witness is himself. Rick makes a determined effort to focus on a complex scientific problem, the unification of quantum gravity with the standard model, something that always occupies his full attention. The equations appear sprawling and intricate, but they take position alongside the emotional artifacts rather than displacing them. Rick's mind is apparently large enough to hold both types of thoughts simultaneously, a fact made visually obvious in this dimension. The dream creature that had been following Rick returns, floating silently at the edge of his thought cloud. It observes the proliferation of personal manifestations with what seems like increased interest. Slowly, methodically, it begins to interact with Rick's thought cloud, moving certain manifestations into proximity with others. "Hey, knock it off," Rick protests as the creature arranges his memories like puzzle pieces. But as the pattern emerges, Rick falls silent, watching with reluctant fascination. The creature positions the manifestation of Beth as a child, next to a memory of Rick walking out the door on one of his many departures. It places Rick's wedding ring beside a manifestation of Rick drinking alone in his spaceship. It creates a circle of various Mortys, arranging them in what appears to be chronological order, showing the gradual shift in their relationship from blind trust to complicated loyalty. As the pattern takes shape, Rick sees something he's spent years avoiding: the recursive nature of his choices. The cycle of connection and abandonment. The pattern of pushing away those he cares about most deeply. The manifestations arranged by the dream creature tell a story that Rick has never wanted to acknowledge. The story of a man so afraid of loss that he preemptively destroys his connections before they can be taken from him. "I get it, okay?" Rick says to the dream creature. "I'm emotionally stunted. Breaking news." But even as he deflects with sarcasm, Rick can't look away from the pattern. The creature continues its work, creating a timeline of Rick's life that highlights moments of connection followed by self-sabotage. Beth reaching for him, Rick turning away. Diane offering forgiveness, Rick choosing revenge instead. Morty extending trust, Rick exploiting it. The most revealing arrangement comes when the creature positions the manifestation of Rick's original family, Diane and Beth before the tragedy, directly opposite a manifestation of Rick creating the first citadel of Ricks. The visual connection between these events is undeniable, a clear cause and effect that Rick has always understood intellectually but never fully processed emotionally. "Yeah, I know," Rick says quietly. "I lost them, so I made sure I'd never lose anyone again by not having anyone to lose." Real original trauma response. Despite his sardonic tone, Rick's voice wavers slightly. The manifestations around him pulse in response to his emotional state, growing brighter and more vibrant. The creature makes one final adjustment to the arrangement, bringing forward a manifestation Rick hadn't noticed forming. A simple image of the Smith family dinner table, with an empty chair where Rick should be sitting. The manifestation pulses with a deep blue color that suggests longing. Rick stares at this manifestation for a long time. "So that's what this is about? You're saying I'm afraid they'll abandon me, so I abandon them first? That I secretly want that normal family crap but won't let myself have it? Wow, groundbreaking psychological insight. Did you get your dream therapy license from a cereal box?" Despite his dismissive words, Rick doesn't look away from the pattern the creature has created. For the first time, he sees the recurring motifs in his own psyche made literal. His fear of abandonment, his terror of failure, his desperate need for connection that conflicts with his equally powerful drive for independence. These aren't new revelations intellectually. Rick has always been self-aware enough to understand his own psychology. But seeing these patterns rendered visually, unable to dismiss or deny them, forces a different kind of acknowledgement. The creature pulses once, projecting a sense of completion, and withdraws slightly. It continues watching Rick, who floats silently amid the constellation of his own psyche, face illuminated by the glow of memories he usually keeps buried beneath layers of science, cynicism, and alcohol. While Rick is still processing the revelations about his own subconscious patterns, something unexpected catches his attention. Against the shifting colors of the thought planes, a figure appears that doesn't match the random thought manifestations orbiting around him. This figure moves with purpose, with independence, with a familiar, awkward gait that Rick recognizes instantly. "Morty," Rick says, his voice carrying strangely through the dimension. The figure turns toward Rick's voice, and there's no mistaking it now. It's definitely Morty. But something about this Morty is different from the thought manifestations Rick had been creating. Those were static, like photographs, or brief looping animations of memories. This Morty looks solid, dimensional, aware. His eyes track Rick, with recognition rather than the blank stare of Rick's manifested memories. Rick approaches cautiously, studying this apparent Morty. Unlike Rick's thought manifestations, which have a slight transparency to them, this Morty seems fully present. He's wearing his typical yellow shirt and blue jeans, but they have a lived-in quality. Wrinkles in places that make sense, a small stain on the sleeve that wasn't part of Rick's mental image of his grandson. "Morty, is that actually you?" Rick asks, floating closer but maintaining some distance. After everything he's learned about this dimension, he's wary of what might appear to be real but isn't. Or are you just some weird dream manifestation that's more detailed than the others? The Morty looks around at the bizarre dimension, then back at Rick. "Rick?" "Oh man, I think I'm dreaming again," Morty says, his voice carrying that familiar nervous tone. "I've been having these weird dreams lately where I keep finding you in these strange places." Rick circles around the Morty, examining him from different angles. "This is interesting. You're not just a thought manifestation. You're actually here, aren't you? You're dreaming right now, back in your bed, and somehow you ended up in the same dream dimension as me." Morty looks confused, which is his default expression during most adventures, but especially fitting in this context. "I don't understand what's happening, Rick. I keep having these dreams where I'm following you through weird places. Sometimes there's like floating stuff everywhere, or colors that keep changing, or weird jellyfish things that don't talk. But I always forget most of it when I wake up." Rick's scientific curiosity kicks into high gear. "Morty, this isn't just a regular dream. We're in a dimension that exists at the intersection of consciousness and sleep, the thought planes. Dreamers from across the multiverse come here while they're asleep, usually without remembering it when they wake up." Morty looks around at the shifting colors and strange entities floating in the distance. "So all these things, are people dreaming?" "Most of them, yeah," Rick confirms. "But what's really interesting is that you're here at the same time as me. That shouldn't be random." Rick begins theorizing out loud, a habit he's developed over years of adventures where Morty serves as his reluctant sounding board. "Our brains must be quantum entangled from all our adventures together. All that portal hopping, all those weird radiations we've been exposed to. It's created a psychic link between us. That's why you keep ending up in the same area of the thought planes as me." Morty seems to be adjusting to the environment, experimenting with the floating sensation. Unlike Rick, who needed time to figure out how movement works here, Morty adapts almost instantly, naturally understanding how to navigate through thought alone. Rick notices this with surprise. Morty's intuitive grasp of dream physics surpasses his own. "I've had these dreams a lot," Morty explains, floating in a small circle around Rick. "But they're always fuzzy when I wake up. Like I know I had them, but I can't remember details." As they talk, Rick notices something else interesting. Morty's thought manifestations are forming around him, just as Rick's do. But Morty's manifestations are completely different in nature. Where Rick's thoughts tend to form as specific objects, memories, or scientific concepts, Morty's thoughts manifest as abstract shapes, swirls of color, and emotional impressions. They're less defined but somehow more vivid, pulsing with bright colors that shift and change rapidly. "Your thought patterns are totally different from mine," Rick observes, watching as Morty unconsciously creates a spiral of warm gold light that seems to represent happiness. "You're generating emotional states rather than specific objects or memories." Morty looks at the colorful abstractions floating around him. "I can kind of control them if I try," he says, focusing on one swirl until it shifts from gold to a deep blue that somehow conveys loneliness without taking any recognizable shape. Rick watches with scientific fascination as Morty demonstrates an intuitive mastery of emotional projection that Rick himself couldn't achieve. For all of Rick's genius, Morty's emotional intelligence gives him different capabilities in this dimension. A new thought occurs to Rick. If they're both here, aware of each other, could they use this connection somehow? Morty, if we're meeting in this dimension while we're both asleep, we might be able to communicate things here that carry over when we wake up. Like what? Morty asks, creating a swirl of curious green light without seeming to notice he's doing it. I don't know. Emergency protocols, secret codes, contingency plans, Rick suggests. Things we might need if we're ever separated or in danger. Morty considers this, then shakes his head. But Rick, I told you, I never remember these dreams clearly when I wake up. I just have a feeling that they happened. Rick frowns, floating in a slow circle as he thinks. There might be ways to improve dream recall. Certain chemicals, mental exercises. He pauses, watching Morty unconsciously create a complex emotional impression that seems to represent his feelings about their adventures. A mixture of excitement, fear, and deep attachment that takes no physical form, but is unmistakable in meaning. Something about seeing Morty's emotional landscape spread out visually affects Rick. He notices that his own thought cloud has shifted in response, generating manifestations he wasn't consciously thinking about. Protective scenarios appear. Rick shielding Morty from danger, Rick helping Morty learn, Rick watching over Morty while he sleeps. These thoughts form without Rick's deliberate creation, suggesting they're deeply embedded patterns in his subconscious. Huh, Rick says softly, trying to dismiss these manifestations before Morty notices them. But in this dimension, thoughts can't be easily hidden or erased. The evidence of Rick's protective instincts toward his grandson remains visible, orbiting around him like satellites. Morty looks at these manifestations with surprise. Rick, are those your thoughts about me? Rick tries to wave them away. Just random. Neural firing, Morty. This dimension manifests all kinds of subconscious garbage. Don't read too much into it. But both of them can see the truth made visible by the thought planes. Beyond the adventures, beyond the science, beyond the constant danger, Rick's mind contains deeply ingrained patterns of protection and care for Morty that he would never verbally acknowledge in waking life. So we've been meeting here before, Morty asks, changing the subject to spare Rick's discomfort. In other dreams. Rick nods, grateful for the shift. According to that jellyfish thing over there, we've probably been connecting in this dimension for years without remembering it. Our minds know each other here, even if our waking selves forget. Morty looks around at the vast, strange expanse of the thought planes. That's actually kind of nice, he says simply. Even when we're asleep, we're still having adventures together. After understanding the rules of this dream dimension and meeting Morty, Rick decides it's time to do what he does best: take control of his environment. With his scientific mind already mapping out the principles of this strange reality, Rick begins actively trying to manipulate the thought planes rather than just floating around observing it. All right, let's see what we can really do with this place, Rick mutters, focusing his attention on creating something more substantial than the random thought objects that have been appearing around him. He concentrates on forming a workbench similar to the one in his garage, something stable and functional that he could actually use. The air in front of Rick shimmers intensely as molecules begin arranging themselves. The workbench takes shape, looking solid and well-defined, much more stable than his previous thought manifestations. Rick approaches it with satisfaction, reaching out to test its solidity. As his hands touch the surface, the bench responds like a real object. He even manages to open and close the drawers, finding thought versions of his tools inside. Now we're talking, Rick says, pleased with his creation. He concentrates on adding more details, specific tools, material properties, even the stains and burn marks from his actual workbench. The more detail he adds, the more solid the manifestation becomes. However, Rick's intense focus on manipulation has unexpected consequences. As he works on stabilizing his creation, ripples of energy spread outward from his position, affecting the thought manifestations of other dreamers nearby. A distant entity's thought cloud suddenly shifts color, another dreamer's manifestations temporarily dissolve, and a third entity is pushed slightly off course, their floating trajectory altered by Rick's mental exertion. One of the native dream creatures approaches Rick, pulsing with what seems like concern. It projects a series of images into his mind. other dreamers experiencing disruption, the balance of the dimension temporarily destabilized by his forceful approach. "What, I'm not allowed to control my own dream space?" Rick asks defensively. But even as he says it, he realizes his mistake. This isn't just his dream. Space. It's a shared dimension with its own established patterns and balance. Trying to impose his will directly is causing interference with the experiences of other dreamers. The dream creature projects another series of images, suggesting a different approach. Instead of forcing the dimension to conform to his will through concentrated effort, the creature shows Rick examples of subtle influence, emotional shifts, intentional guidance, working with the natural flow of the dream dimension rather than against it. Rick tries again, this time focusing less on forcing his creation into existence and more on feeling its presence, becoming receptive to the dimension's responsive nature. He thinks about his workbench again, but instead of mentally constructing it piece by piece, he simply holds the complete image in his mind while remaining open to how the dimension might manifest it. The result appears more smoothly this time, still his workbench, but now it seems to grow naturally from the environment, rather than being forcibly inserted into it. No disruption ripples affect the nearby dreamers. The dream creature pulses with approval. "So it's not about control, it's about cooperation," Rick says, understanding the principle. The dimension responds better to guidance than force. This approach goes against Rick's usual methods. Typically, he bends reality to his will through science and technology, forcing compliance from uncooperative universes. Here, that approach simply doesn't work. Rick experiments further, learning to stabilize his thought manifestations, not by gripping them tightly with his mind, but by maintaining a consistent emotional connection to them. The objects he creates with genuine interest or emotional significance last much longer than those he tries to maintain through pure concentration. That's why emotional thoughts were more stable than intellectual ones, Rick realizes. It's not about how hard you focus, it's about how much you care. This insight, while simple, represents a significant shift in Rick's approach to reality manipulation. With practice, Rick discovers he can create increasingly complex manifestations by building them layer by layer, each addition guided by intuition rather than forced through will. He constructs a thought version of his garage, complete with functioning equipment and organized storage. Unlike his earlier attempts at complex creation, this structure remains stable even when Rick's attention shifts elsewhere. The native dream creatures gather to observe Rick's progress, their jellyfish-like forms pulsing with what seems like approval. Occasionally, they make subtle adjustments to his creations, showing him more efficient ways to work with the dimension's properties. These aren't corrections so much as refinements, like master artists guiding a talented student. As Rick continues to experiment, he discovers another technique for stabilizing his creations, linking them to existing aspects of the dimension rather than trying to make them stand completely independent. When he anchors his thought structures to the natural patterns of the thought planes, they become more integrated and persistent. It's like building with the grain instead of against it, Rick observes, watching as his creations begin to last for extended periods without degradation. The dream creatures respond by arranging symbols around his manifestations, suggesting additional connections and refinements. Rick's mastery grows rapidly. He learns to create thought structures that respond to other dreamers without disrupting their experiences. He develops techniques for shared manifestation, allowing his creations to interact harmoniously with those of nearby entities. He discovers methods for embedding his thoughts within the fabric of the dimension itself, making them accessible to other dreamers who might benefit from them. Looking at a particularly complex problem he's been working on, a new approach to interdimensional travel without relying on his portal gun, Rick wonders if he could use this dimension to find solutions that have eluded him in the waking world. The dream creatures respond to this thought immediately, arranging his existing manifestations into patterns that highlight new possibilities and connections. This place isn't just for processing emotional crap, Rick realizes. It's a problem-solving playground where limitations don't apply. The subconscious can work through complex problems by visualizing solutions the conscious mind might miss. The more Rick works with the dimension rather than trying to dominate it, the more responsive it becomes to his presence. The colors around him shift to harmonize with his emotional state, The fabric of the thought planes seems to anticipate his intentions, preparing the space for his next creation before he fully formulates it in his mind. This represents a rare instance where Rick adapts to a universe rather than bending it to his will. Usually, Rick approaches new dimensions as territories to be conquered, their rules to be exploited or circumvented. Here, he's learning to work within the established patterns, finding power through cooperation rather than domination. As Rick masters the properties of the thought planes, the landscape around him becomes increasingly stable and responsive. His thought manifestations gain complexity and duration. His ability to navigate the dimension improves, allowing him to move effortlessly between different regions of the dream space. The native creatures interact with him more directly, their symbolic guidance becoming clearer as Rick learns to interpret their unique communication. "No wonder some of my best ideas seem to come out of nowhere when I wake up," Rick says, watching as a solution to a complex engineering problem forms itself through the collaborative effort of his conscious direction and the dimension's responsive nature. "I've been working on them here all along." The growing harmony between Rick and this strange dimension represents something valuable, not just scientific understanding, but a different kind of relationship with reality. For perhaps the first time, Rick finds himself adapting to a universe's rules rather than forcing them to adapt to him, and discovering unexpected benefits from this approach. With his newfound understanding of the thought planes, Rick decides to put this dimension to the test. He's got plenty of scientific problems that have been frustrating him in the waking world. Issues that have kept him up at night, forced him to throw equipment across his garage, and even made him consider asking for help. Rick Sanchez doesn't ask for help, but now he's wondering if this strange dream dimension might offer a different kind of assistance. "All right," Rick says to himself as he floats in the colorful void. "Let's see what this place can do with something actually challenging." He focuses his thoughts on a problem that's been bothering him for weeks, a power fluctuation issue in his latest portal gun prototype. Every time the device reaches 82% power, it experiences a cascade failure that he hasn't been able to diagnose. As Rick concentrates on the problem, the air around him fills with components. Circuit diagrams form in 3 dimensions. Power management systems materialize with every connection visible, and a complete miniature version of the prototype hovers before him. Unlike his normal thought manifestations, these technical visualizations appear with perfect clarity. Every connection, every component, even the quantum flux regulators that are normally invisible to the naked eye. "This is what I've been missing," Rick mutters, moving around the floating schematic. "In the real world, I can't see all these systems operating simultaneously." He watches as power flows through the visualization, represented by streams of light pulsing through the circuitry. When the power level reaches 82%, Rick can actually see where the problem occurs, a feedback loop in the containment system that wasn't visible in his garage testing. One of the dream creatures drifts closer, observing Rick's work. It gently adjusts part of the visualization, pulling certain components into greater focus while slightly rearranging their configuration. Rick watches with interest as the creature highlights a relationship between components he hadn't considered. "You're suggesting a parallel circuit here instead of series?" Rick asks. The creature pulses in what seems like affirmation. Rick implements the change in the visualization, watching as the power now flows smoothly past the 82% threshold. "That shouldn't work," Rick says, his scientific mind immediately questioning the solution. "The quantum variance would..." He pauses as the visualization shows exactly how the quantum variance stabilizes through the new configuration. That actually makes sense. Encouraged by this success, Rick decides to tackle a much more complex problem, one that's been bothering him for years. He focuses on the unified theory of multidimensional physics he's been working on, the equations that would explain how all realities connect and interact. This is the scientific equivalent of climbing Mount Everest, the kind of problem that entire civilizations have failed to solve. The space around Rick transforms as equations spread out in all directions, forming a complex web of mathematical relationships. Unlike in the waking world, where Rick has to hold these relationships in his mind or write them down sequentially, here he can see the entire theoretical framework simultaneously. Connections that weren't obvious before now literally glow with relationship lines between them. "I can see everything at once," Rick says, turning slowly to take in the massive visualization. "In the garage, I can only focus on one part of the equation at a time. Here, I'm getting the full picture." He moves through the floating mathematical forest, noticing patterns and symmetries that weren't apparent when working with the theory in pieces. As Rick works, he notices something interesting. Whenever he approaches certain areas of the equation, particularly those dealing with the relationship between time and conscious observation, his thought manifestations of his family briefly appear and then fade. Beth's childhood image flickers near a variable representing stability across timelines. Morty appears beside equations describing observer effects on dimensional constants. "What the hell?" Rick mutters, trying to focus purely on the mathematics and ignore these emotional intrusions. But the more he tries to dismiss them, the more frequently they appear. Eventually, Rick pauses, floating amid his mathematical forest, and addresses the dream creature that continues to observe him. "What's with the family slideshow? I'm trying to work here." The creature responds not with direct communication, but by rearranging parts of Rick's equation, bringing the sections where family manifestations appeared into a new configuration. As the creature completes this adjustment, Rick sees something he's missed: a fundamental relationship between consciousness, emotional attachment, and dimensional stability. "No way," Rick says, staring at the new arrangement. "The observer effect isn't just about measurement, it's about connection." He moves closer to examine this revelation. The strength of dimensional bridges correlates with emotional investment across those dimensions. The implications are enormous. Rick's own ability to travel between dimensions may be enhanced by his emotional connections to people in those dimensions, particularly his family. Rick tries to dismiss this insight as irrelevant sentimentality, but the mathematics don't lie. The unity theory works perfectly when this relationship is included, creating a seamless theoretical framework that accounts for anomalies Rick could never explain before. His lifelong attempt to separate emotion from science may have actually been preventing him from seeing the complete picture. The dream creature pulses with what seems like satisfaction as Rick reluctantly incorporates this new understanding into his unified theory. With this emotional component acknowledged, the entire mathematical structure reaches a beautiful symmetry that wasn't possible before. Rick has to admit that his breakthrough came not just from seeing the problem differently, but from allowing emotional factors into his scientific process. As Rick continues working through problems in this dimension, the pattern becomes clear. His conscious analytical mind provides the framework and technical knowledge, while his subconscious, represented by these emotional connections and the guidance of the dream creatures, offers unexpected pathways and solutions. Together, they accomplish what neither could alone. Rick tackles problem after problem that had stumped him in the waking world. A cooling system for his spaceship that kept overheating, solved by visualizing heat flow patterns he couldn't see in the garage. A quantum encryption algorithm he couldn't quite perfect, completed when he sees the mathematical symmetry from multiple angles simultaneously. A neural interface that kept causing feedback loops, fixed when he notices a pattern inspired by his own brain structure. With each solution, Rick becomes increasingly aware that this dimension offers something unique: a direct collaboration between his conscious and subconscious mind. His analytical thinking works alongside intuitive leaps and emotional insights, creating a problem-solving approach that's greater than the sum of its parts. As Rick works through his mental backlog of scientific challenges, a troubling question forms in his mind. "Am I going to remember any of this when I wake up?" he asks the dream creature that has been assisting him. The creature's response is ambiguous, a series of images suggesting partial recall, intuitive nudges, and fragments of memory that might surface during waking hours. Rick looks at the array of solutions hovering around him, breakthroughs that would normally take months or years of work. "So you're telling me I might come up with these same solutions eventually in the waking world, just through harder and slower methods?" The creature pulses in what seems like agreement. This realization leads Rick to a profound insight about his own genius. Many of his greatest inventions throughout the years seem to come to him in moments of intuition or sudden clarity. often upon waking or after sleep. What if those weren't just the random firings of his brilliant mind? What if they were actually the results of problem-solving sessions in this dimension that he couldn't consciously remember? "I've been solving problems in my sleep this whole time," Rick says, watching as his unified theory rotates gently before him, complete in a way he couldn't achieve in his garage. "My greatest breakthroughs weren't just random inspiration. They were solutions I worked out here and then, partially remembered." This explains so much about Rick's seemingly impossible intuitive leaps. The connections no other scientist could make, the solutions that appeared to come from nowhere. His conscious mind wasn't working alone. It had a partner in this strange dimension where thought and reality intertwine, where problems can be seen from impossible angles, and where the boundaries between emotion and intellect dissolve. Rick starts to notice something changing around him. The colors of the thought planes begin to shift a little differently, almost like they're getting ready for something. The dreamlike quality of the environment intensifies, and Rick realizes what's happening. He's starting to wake up. The dimension isn't changing. His connection to it is. "No, not yet," Rick mutters, looking around at all the scientific breakthroughs floating around him, solutions to problems he's been working on for months. If he wakes up now, he might lose everything he's discovered here. Rick tries to focus harder, attempting to mentally anchor himself in this dimension a little longer, but the fading continues despite his efforts. The dream creatures seem to sense his concern. Several of them drift toward Rick, their jellyfish-like forms pulsing with calm blue light. They surround him in a loose circle, not interfering with his thought manifestations, but simply observing. Rick gets the feeling they've seen this many times before. Dreamers realizing they're about to wake up and trying desperately to hold on to their experiences. "I need to remember this," Rick says to the creatures, gesturing at the complex solutions floating around him. All of it. The portal gun modifications, the unified field theory, the interdimensional positioning system. I can't lose these again. Rick tries to concentrate, focusing on burning the most critical information into his memory, hoping something will stick when he returns to consciousness. The dream creatures respond by projecting a series of rapid images directly into Rick's mind. They come fast, almost too quick to process, but Rick's genius intellect catches them. The images show a sequence of actions. Rick sitting in a meditative posture in his garage, focusing on a specific mental pattern, his consciousness gradually shifting from normal awareness to something else. The images continue, showing Rick's mind returning to this dimension not randomly through sleep, but through deliberate intention. "You're showing me how to come back," Rick realizes, how to access the thought planes consciously. The creatures pulse in unison, confirming his understanding. They continue projecting images, this time showing specific mental exercises, breathing patterns, and even a simple device that could assist in achieving the necessary mental state. Rick studies these visions intently, trying to commit every detail to memory. This dimension isn't just a random dream space he accidentally stumbles into while sleeping. It's a place he could potentially visit whenever he needs to, if he masters the right techniques. The scientific implications are enormous. Rick could use this dimension as a problem-solving workshop, a place to visualize complex systems in ways impossible in normal reality. As the dimension continues to fade around him, Rick decides to use his remaining time for one final creation. He focuses intently on designing a small device, something he could build in his garage that would help him record his experiences here, or potentially help him return more easily. His thought manifestation takes form, a compact apparatus with components that respond to specific brainwave patterns. The device hovers before Rick, more detailed and stable than any of his previous manifestations. He studies it from every angle, mentally noting each component, each connection, each specific function. This isn't just another scientific tool. It's a bridge between worlds, something that could connect his waking consciousness to this dream dimension where thoughts become reality. The dream creatures watch with apparent approval as Rick works. They occasionally adjust small details of his design, suggesting refinements or alternatives. Rick accepts their input, understanding now that they have centuries of experience with dreamers like him, trying to maintain connections to the thought planes after waking. As Rick puts the finishing touches on his device design, the thought planes begin to fade more rapidly around him. The colors grow less vivid, the thought. Manifestations less solid. Rick can feel his physical body now, distant but increasingly present. The sensation of lying in bed, the sound of birds outside his window, the early morning light on his closed eyelids. "I'm not done yet," Rick protests, trying to hold on to the dream dimension a little longer. He focuses on the most important insights he's gained, not just the scientific breakthroughs, but the emotional revelations as well. The pattern of his relationships with his family, the connection between emotion and dimensional physics, the possibilities of conscious collaboration with his own subconscious mind. The dream creatures gather closer as Rick struggles to maintain his connection. They project one final series of images, Rick returning to this dimension many times, his visits becoming more controlled, more intentional. The images suggest that even if he forgets specific details upon waking, the experiences will remain in his subconscious, influencing his waking thoughts and guiding him back to this place. This final revelation hits Rick with unexpected force. The thought planes aren't just a passive problem-solving space that he randomly visits during sleep. They're a dimension he can learn to access intentionally, a tool he can use for both scientific discovery and emotional processing. The implications extend far beyond simply solving technical problems. This dimension offers Rick a new way to understand himself, to integrate the parts of his psyche that he usually keeps separate. The dream creatures begin to dissolve as Rick's waking consciousness strengthens. Before they fade completely, they arrange Rick's remaining thought manifestations into a pattern that seems to represent a bridge, a connection between different states of consciousness, different ways of knowing. The message is clear. This isn't goodbye, just a transition. As the thought planes fade around him, Rick experiences something unusual, a sense of peace. Not the resigned cynicism he typically carries into waking life, but a genuine feeling of calm anticipation. There's work waiting for him in the garage, a meditation device to build, techniques to master, a bridge to construct between conscious and subconscious thought. Rick feels his body now, the actual weight of it in his bed. His mind begins the transition to normal consciousness, but part of him remains aware of what he's leaving behind. The unified field theory he nearly completed. The portal gun modifications that could revolutionize his travel between dimensions. The truth about his relationships with his family that he usually keeps buried beneath layers of sarcasm and alcohol. Just before waking completely, Rick catches one final glimpse of the thought planes. Not as the vivid, interactive dimension he's been exploring, but as a fading impression, a memory already starting to dissolve. The dream creatures have receded, the thought manifestations have disappeared, but something remains. A feeling, an intuition, a knowing that transcends specific memories. As Rick opens his eyes to the ceiling of his bedroom, he feels different. The usual morning bitterness is absent, replaced by an unusual clarity of purpose. He can't remember all the specific details of his dream, but certain images remain surprisingly vivid. A small device he needs to build, a meditation technique he wants to try, a new approach to the unified field theory that feels tantalizingly close. Rick sits up in bed, his mind already racing with ideas that seem to come from nowhere, yet feel perfectly obvious. He doesn't question their source. Some part of him knows these insights are echoes from the thought planes, solutions his subconscious mind developed in that strange dimension where thought becomes matter and gravity is optional. For the first time in longer than he can remember, Rick Sanchez wakes up feeling something close to hope. Not just for scientific breakthroughs, but for something more personal. A new tool for understanding himself, a new dimension to explore, a new approach to the complexities of being Rick Sanchez. It all begins in the Smith family garage on what seems like a normal evening. We see Rick hunched over his workbench, tinkering with a small metallic device that looks kind of like a combination between an old-school Game Boy and one of those noise machines people use to fall asleep. Morty walks in, curious about what his grandpa's working on this time. Rick doesn't even look up when Morty enters. He just keeps adjusting tiny wires inside the device with his steady hands. "What's that supposed to be, Rick?" Morty asks, leaning in to get a better look at the strange gadget. Rick finally glances up, bags under his eyes, suggesting he's been working on this thing for a while now. This, Morty, is going to save us all from your dad's constant whining, Rick explains, holding up the device. I'm calling it the sleep inductor. Jerry's insomnia has gotten so bad he started wandering around the house at night talking about his feelings. I can't take it anymore. Rick continues explaining that Jerry's complaints about being tired have reached a breaking point. We see Rick mimicking Jerry's voice. Oh, I'm so exhausted, I haven't slept well in days, nobody understands my suffering. And then Rick makes a dramatic gagging motion. This is actually kind of thoughtful by Rick standards, even if he's framing it as something he's doing for himself rather than to help Jerry. So this thing just puts him to sleep? Morty asks, sounding understandably skeptical given Rick's history with inventions that seem simple but end up causing interdimensional catastrophes. Not just puts him to sleep, Morty. This creates the perfect sleep state, Rick says, his voice taking on that slightly excited tone he gets when explaining the science behind his creations. It identifies specific brainwave patterns and then synchronizes with them, gradually shifting them toward delta waves. That's the deep sleep stuff. It doesn't just knock him out like a tranquilizer, it actually guides the brain through natural sleep cycles. Morty looks somewhat impressed as Rick continues adjusting the final components. Wow, that actually sounds pretty helpful, Rick. Yeah, well, don't get used to it. I'm only doing this so I don't have to hear him complain anymore, Rick says, closing the device's small metal panel and holding it up. Want to see how it works? And this is where things start to go wrong, as they typically do with Rick's demonstrations. Rick powers on the sleep inductor, and it emits a soft blue glow while making a gentle humming sound. He begins explaining how the user interface works, pointing out different settings for light sleepers versus heavy sleepers, and a special dream control option that he mentions in passing. This dial here adjusts the depth of sleep. This button activates dream suggestion mode, and this port here connects to... But before Rick can finish his explanation, the device makes a strange clicking sound and the light changes from blue to a deep purple. Rick? Is it supposed to do that? Morty asks, backing away slightly. No, definitely not supposed to do that, Rick responds, suddenly looking concerned as he frantically tries to shut it off. Something's interfering with the quantum sleep field generator. Possibly the dream suggestion matrix has... That's when the device sparks dramatically, cutting Rick off mid-sentence. A strange purple mist starts pouring out of the sleep inductor, quickly filling the garage. Rick tries to throw the device away from them, but the mist moves with surprising speed, surrounding both him and Morty before they can escape. Don't breathe it in, Morty, Rick shouts, but it's already too late. The purple mist seems to be entering their bodies through their skin, not just their lungs. Both of them start to feel heavy and dizzy as the mist thickens around them. Rick, what's happening? Morty asks, his voice sounding distorted and distant even to his own ears. We're being pulled into a sleep dimension, Rick explains, fighting to stay. On his feet as the mist continues to surround them. Not fully asleep, not fully awake, but somewhere in between. We see both Rick and Morty collapse to the floor of the garage as the purple mist completely engulfs them. Their bodies remain there, eyes closed, breathing steadily as if in deep sleep. But their minds are somewhere else entirely. The scene transitions, and we find Rick and Morty standing in what looks like the garage, but something is different. The colors are slightly off. Objects appear to float gently when not being observed directly, and the walls seem to breathe subtly. Rick immediately recognizes what's happened while Morty starts to panic. Oh man, oh geez, Rick, what just happened? Are we dead? Did that thing kill us? Morty frantically looks around, his voice rising with each question. Calm down, Morty, Rick snaps, grabbing his grandson by the shoulders. We're not dead, we're just trapped in a sleep dimension. My sleep inductor malfunctioned and created a shared dream state. Our bodies are still in the garage, but our consciousness is here in this dream reality. Morty's breathing is still fast and shallow as he tries to process what Rick is telling him. Rick notices this, and his tone becomes uncharacteristically patient. Listen to me, Morty. We need to stay calm. In dream dimensions, emotions have direct effects on the stability of the environment. Your panic is already making things worse. Look. Rick points to the ceiling, which has begun to crack and shift in response to Morty's anxiety. Strange whispers start to emanate from the walls. Morty takes a deep breath, trying to control his fear. As he starts to calm down, the whispers fade and the ceiling stabilizes. "That's better," Rick says, walking over to what looks like his workbench but is strangely fuzzy around the edges. Based on the resonance frequency of the sleep inductor's malfunction, I'm guessing we're trapped in a series of interconnected dream dimensions. Each one will probably reflect aspects of our subconscious minds. "So, how do we get out?" Morty asks, carefully controlling his voice to prevent another shift in the dream environment. Rick runs his hand through his hair, thinking. "We need to find the dream core, the central nexus connecting all these dream dimensions. If we can reach it, I can probably reset the sleep inductor from within the dream and wake us up." "And how exactly do we find this dream core?" Morty asks. "We'll have to pass through multiple dream dimensions to get there," Rick explains, pointing to a door that definitely wasn't in the garage before. A door that seems to be made of flowing water that somehow doesn't spill onto the floor. Each dimension will present different challenges based on our subconscious. We'll have to navigate through them, adapting to each one's dream logic to progress. Morty looks at the strange door with apprehension. "This sounds dangerous, Rick." "It could be," Rick admits, unusual honesty in his voice. Dream dimensions operate on their own rules. Physics, time, even identity can be fluid here. But if we understand the logic of each dimension, we can use it to move forward. As Rick finishes his explanation, the purple mist that brought them here begins to thin out around them. The garage-like environment starts to fade, the walls becoming transparent, revealing a strange landscape beyond. "Here we go, Morty," Rick says, walking toward the water door. "Stay close and remember, control your emotions. The stronger they are, the more power they'll have over these dream worlds." Morty nods and follows his grandfather. As they approach the door, the garage completely dissolves around them, and they find themselves standing at the edge of a forest unlike anything they've seen before. The trees have faces carved into their trunks, and everything seems slightly off. Colors too vibrant, shadows moving independently of their sources, and a strange feeling that everything around them is somehow alive and watching. As Rick and Morty step through the watery door, they find themselves in a dense forest unlike anything they've seen before. The trees around them stretch impossibly high with trunks that twist in unusual patterns, and each tree has what looks like a face embedded in its bark. Not carved faces, but actual living faces that blink and observe the newcomers with calm curiosity. The entire forest is bathed in a soft blue light that doesn't seem to come from any particular source, but rather exists everywhere at once, giving everything a dreamlike quality. "Wow, Rick, this place is actually kinda nice," Morty says in his normal speaking voice, looking around at the strangely peaceful environment. Immediately after he speaks, the trees around them visibly wince, their facial expressions contorting in discomfort. The ground beneath their feet shifts slightly, sinking down about an inch, creating small depressions where they stand. "Morty!" Rick shouts in response, causing the trees to shake more violently and the ground to sink even further. Several inches of dirt give way beneath them, almost like quicksand starting to form. Rick quickly notices what's happening and puts his finger to his lips. "We need to whisper," he says, dramatically lowering his voice to barely above a breath. This dimension operates on quiet. Loud noises disrupt its stability. Morty looks alarmed but nods in understanding. "Like this?" he whispers back, his voice now soft and gentle. As soon as he switches to whispering, the trees' expressions relax, and the ground beneath them slowly firms up again, returning to its normal state. "Exactly," Rick whispers, his usual gruff demeanor somehow softened by the hushed tone. "This must be the Whispering Woods. I've heard rumors about dream dimensions like this, places where sound itself has physical properties that affect the environment." We see Rick looking around with scientific curiosity rather than his typical irritation when faced with a new challenge. As they stand there adjusting to the need for whispers, strange beings begin to emerge from between the trees. These creatures float about 3 feet off the ground and resemble translucent jellyfish with gently pulsing bodies that give off a faint purplish glow. Where a jellyfish would have a central mass, these beings have what appear to be human faces. Serene, ageless faces with closed eyes that occasionally open to reveal pupils that shift colors like slow-moving kaleidoscopes. One of the jellyfish beings floats closer to Rick and Morty, its tendrils swaying gently in a non-existent breeze. When it speaks, its voice comes out as a soothing whisper that somehow sounds like multiple voices speaking in perfect harmony. Visitors? How unusual, the being whispers. What brings you to our quiet realm? Its face shows genuine interest without any hint of threat or alarm. Rick leans toward the being, keeping his voice at a whisper. We're travelers from another dimension. My sleep inductor malfunctioned, and now we're trying to find the dream core so we can wake up and return to our bodies. The jellyfish being's tendrils ripple in what seems to be their version of a nod. The dream core? Yes, we know of this place. It lies beyond many realms of sleep. The being turns, slightly, gesturing with its tendrils toward a barely visible path through the trees. We can guide you along the first steps of your journey. Morty whispers to Rick, should we trust them? His soft voice carries just far enough for Rick to hear, but doesn't disturb the trees. In dream dimensions, cooperation with the local dream logic usually helps us progress, Rick whispers back. Besides, these beings seem peaceful enough. They're probably manifestations of the subconscious desire for tranquility during sleep. Rick turns back to the jellyfish being and whispers, we would appreciate your guidance. As soon as Rick accepts their help, the path through the forest becomes more distinct, glowing with a soft light that makes it clearly visible among the trees. We see this as another example of how accepting the dream logic helps them navigate through this strange dimension. The jellyfish beings, there are about 5 of them now, float ahead of Rick and Morty, leading them along the illuminated path. As they travel deeper into the whispering woods, the jellyfish guides point out various sleeping creatures that inhabit this realm. They pass what looks like a dream version of a Cromalon from the giant heads dimension. But instead of shouting, show me what you got, this one is curled up on a bed of moss, softly murmuring, please show me what you have, in its sleep. Many beings across dimensions connect to our realm during their rest cycles, one of the jellyfish whispers. Here, even the most aggressive creatures find peace in whispers. They continue along the path, passing dream versions of Gazorpians, Meeseeks, and even what appears to be a sleeping bird person tucked underneath a large leaf. All of these beings rest peacefully in the gentle blue light of the forest, occasionally whispering fragments of dreams. One particular jellyfish being moves closer to Rick, floating just beside him as they walk. This one's face looks somewhat different from the others. Its features hold a hint of recognition, almost as if it knows Rick personally. I sense something familiar about you, Rick whispers to it, studying its face. The jellyfish being's expression shifts into something resembling a gentle smile. I am a part of you that rarely finds expression in your waking hours, it whispers back. I represent the peace you deny yourself, the tranquility you could embrace if you allowed yourself moments of quiet reflection. Rick looks uncomfortable with this revelation, but in the whispering atmosphere of this dimension, even his discomfort seems muted and less severe than usual. Yeah, well, peace and quiet aren't exactly compatible with keeping Morty alive and dealing with the infinite catastrophes of the multiverse, he whispers defensively. The jellyfish being's tendrils wave in what might be its version of a shrug. Even the most brilliant minds require rest, Rick Sanchez. Perhaps this journey through the dream dimensions will remind you of this truth. As they continue walking, Morty notices that his own anxiety has begun to fade. The necessary whispering has forced him to slow down, to think before he speaks, and the gentle atmosphere of the forest has a naturally calming effect. We see Morty's shoulders gradually relaxing, his breathing becoming deeper and more regular. This place is actually helping me feel sleepy, Morty whispers to Rick. I wonder if that's part of why we're here. Probably, Rick whispers back. Dream dimensions often serve multiple purposes. While we're trying to find our way back to reality, the dream itself is trying to fulfill its natural function, to process emotions and eventually lead to restful sleep. After walking for what feels like both minutes and hours simultaneously, time being difficult to measure in dream space, they reach a clearing in the forest. At the center of this clearing stands a doorway unlike any other. It appears to be made of softly glowing light that pulses gently like a heartbeat, its edges blurring into the surrounding air. "This is where our path with you ends," the main jellyfish guide whispers. "Beyond this doorway lies the next realm of your journey." The jellyfish being that had spoken to Rick about peace floats forward one last time. "Remember what you have learned in the Whispering Woods," it whispers to both of them. "Sometimes the softest voices carry the most important messages." Rick and Morty thank their guides, their whispered gratitude causing the surrounding trees to sway gently in apparent appreciation. As they approach the glowing doorway, the jellyfish beings float backward, their tendrils waving in farewell. "Ready for the next dimension?" Rick whispers to Morty, standing before the pulsing light. Morty nods, his whispered response calm and steady. "As ready as I'll ever be." Together, they step through the doorway of light. As they pass through, the gentle whispers of the Whispering Woods fade behind them, replaced by a new sensation: the feeling of floating upward rather than falling down. The doorway of light from the Whispering Woods dissolves around Rick and Morty, and suddenly they're standing on what appears to be a small planet with a purplish-blue surface. The landscape around them is simple, just gently rolling hills stretching toward a horizon that curves upward more dramatically than it would on Earth, reminding them they're on a much smaller celestial body. But the most noticeable difference becomes apparent immediately when Morty takes a step forward and finds himself lifting off the ground instead of staying planted on it. "Whoa! Rick! What's happening?" Morty shouts, arms and legs flailing wildly as he begins to float upward. His panicked movements cause him to start spinning in the air, making his situation even more disorienting. We see the terror on his face as he continues to rise toward what looks like a sky filled with soft, fluffy clouds that glow with pastel colors. Rick, who has also begun floating upward, doesn't fight against the sensation. Instead, he allows his body to relax completely, his arms spread out to his sides, his face surprisingly calm. "It's reverse gravity, Morty," he explains, his voice unusually patient. "Instead of pulling us down toward the center of the planet, it's pushing us up toward the sky. Stop fighting it. You're just making it worse." "But we're gonna float away into space," Morty cries, still thrashing around, which only makes him tumble through the air more chaotically. "No, we won't," Rick says, floating serenely upward. "This is a dream dimension, remember? Physics works differently here. The more you struggle against it, the more unstable your journey becomes. Just relax into it. Like this." We see Rick demonstrating by letting his muscles go completely loose, his body straightening out as he gently rises toward the cloud-filled sky. Morty takes a deep breath and makes a visible effort to stop flailing. As soon as he relaxes his muscles, his chaotic spinning slows down and eventually stops. He finds himself floating upward in a much more controlled manner, parallel to Rick. "Okay, this is still weird, but I guess it's not so bad," he admits, the fear in his voice gradually giving way to cautious wonder. The two of them continue to float upward, approaching the first layer of clouds. As they make contact with these clouds, they're surprised by the physical sensation. Instead of the damp mistiness of Earth clouds, these feel more like soft cotton candy against their skin, but without any stickiness. The clouds part gently around them as they pass through, leaving a pleasant tingling sensation on their skin. "These clouds feel amazing," Morty says, his voice now completely free of panic and filled instead with wonder. "Your meat suit's internal GPS gets a little wonky, Morty." "Gravity?" "More like gravity don't care," Rick responds with his usual sarcasm, though we can tell he's also enjoying the pleasant sensation of the clouds. This dimension is simulating the feeling of falling asleep, that moment when your body starts to feel weightless and your brain begins to let go of conscious control. As they float through the first layer of clouds, they emerge into a second layer that's even softer than the first. These clouds have a lavender hue and feel like the softest down feathers against their skin. They find themselves slowing down slightly as they pass through this layer, as if the clouds themselves are gently cushioning their ascent. "The universe's way of saying, 'Hey, take a load off, meatbag,'" Rick comments, closing his eyes briefly to enjoy the sensation before continuing his explanation. "Your body does something similar when you're falling asleep. Your perception of gravity changes as your brain starts processing sensory information differently. Your inner ear and muscles, which usually tell you which way is up, get less active." Floating around them in this second cloud layer, are strange inhabitants that look like balloons with faces. These balloon creatures have large, sleepy eyes that blink slowly as they drift aimlessly through the clouds. Their bodies are translucent, filled with what appears to be colored gas that shifts and swirls within them in hypnotic patterns. Occasionally, one of these balloon beings bumps into Rick or Morty, the contact feeling like being gently touched by a pillow. "Sorry," one balloon creature mumbles sleepily after bumping into Morty's shoulder. Its voice sounds distant and echoing, as if coming from far away despite being right next to them. "These balloon guys are kinda nice," Morty says, gently patting one that floats past him. The balloon creature smiles contentedly at the touch, its eyes closing briefly in what appears to be pleasure. "They represent the random thoughts that float through your mind as you're drifting off," Rick explains, watching as a cluster of balloon creatures float lazily in a spiral pattern nearby. Not fully formed dreams yet, just fragments of consciousness that haven't quite let go. As they continue floating upward, they pass through a third layer of clouds, these ones a soft pink color and feeling even more luxurious than the previous layers, like sinking into the world's most comfortable mattress while still moving upward through it. The sensation is deeply relaxing, and we see Morty's eyelids growing heavy, though he fights to keep them open. "I'm getting really sleepy, Rick," Morty says, his words slightly slurred. "That's the point of this dimension," Rick replies. "But don't fall completely asleep yet. We still need to find the next doorway." Rick looks around at the vast cloud landscape, searching for any sign of their next destination. "We need to control our direction somehow." As if responding to his statement, a balloon creature floats particularly close to Rick and speaks in its dreamy, distant voice. "To guide your path, let go of thought. Direction comes from no direction sought." Rick raises an eyebrow at the cryptic message, but then his face lights up with understanding. "I think I get it," he says to Morty. "In this dimension, trying to control where we go actively prevents us from getting there. We need to completely relax our bodies and minds to navigate. So, we just think about where we want to go without actually trying to go there?" Morty asks, confused. "Something like that," Rick confirms. "Let's try it. See that thing up there?" He points upward to where a strange floating island is barely visible through the pink cloud layer above them. "That's probably our destination. Just relax completely and hold the image of it in your mind without actively trying to move toward it." Morty looks skeptical but follows Rick's instructions. Both of them close their eyes, relax their bodies completely, and simply hold the mental image of the floating island. When they open their eyes again, they're surprised to find themselves moving on a new trajectory, no longer straight up, but at an angle toward the island. "It's working!" Morty exclaims, then quickly relaxes again when his momentary excitement causes their path to wobble. As they get closer to the floating island, they can see that it appears to be made of a substance that looks like memory foam, soft, yielding, and remarkably inviting. The island isn't very large, perhaps the size of a backyard swimming pool, and it floats serenely among the clouds with no visible means of support. "This is perfect," Rick observes as they approach. "This dimension is teaching us, and anyone listening, exactly what it feels like to drift off to sleep. The giving up of control, the sensation of weightlessness, the gradual fading of conscious direction." Their bodies gently connect with the surface of the floating island, and as they make contact, the memory foam-like material shifts and molds around them, creating perfect impressions of their forms. It's as if the island is creating custom beds perfectly fitted to their bodies. The sensation is one of absolute comfort, the kind that makes it almost impossible to want to move again. "Wow," Morty sighs as the material perfectly supports every inch of his body. "I've never felt anything this comfortable in my life." "That's because it's responding directly to our mind's concept of perfect comfort," Rick explains, his own body settled into a perfect impression in the material. "This isn't just some random dream dimension. These places are specifically designed to guide consciousness through different stages of sleep." As Rick and Morty lie on the memory foam island, they start to notice something strange happening. The edges of the island begin to expand outward in all directions, the material shifting and multiplying until it's no longer just an island, but an entire landscape stretching as far as they can see. We see the memory foam transforming into various types of pillows, some large and fluffy like body pillows, others small and firm like throw pillows, all arranged into shapes that form a complete world around them. Rick? Morty says, sitting up and looking around at the transforming environment. What's happening now? Rick also sits up, his eyes narrowing with suspicion as he watches the pillow landscape take shape. Looks like we've entered another dream dimension, one made entirely of pillows. He reaches down and squeezes the ground beneath them, which now feels like a firm memory foam pillow. Interesting physics in this place. The pillows maintain enough structural integrity to form buildings and landscapes while still being soft enough to feel like actual pillows. As the transformation completes, they find themselves sitting in what appears to be a small town square. But everything, literally everything, is made of different types of pillows. The buildings are constructed from large rectangular pillows stacked like bricks, with smaller pillows forming windows and doors. The roads are made of flat, firm pillows that connect in long strips. Even the plants are pillow-shaped, with stems of cylindrical pillows and leaves, and flowers formed from smaller, decorative pillows. Morty stands up, his feet sinking slightly into the pillow road. His face lights up with childlike wonder. This place is amazing. It's like everything is just perfect for sleeping or relaxing. He bounces slightly on his feet, enjoying the gentle give of the pillow surface. Rick gets up more cautiously, looking around with growing suspicion. Yeah, a little too perfect if you ask me. This dimension seems specifically designed to make us never want to leave. He watches as Morty flops backward onto a nearby pillow bush, which cushions his fall perfectly. Don't get too comfortable, Morty. Remember, we need to find the dream core and get back to our bodies. As they start walking through the pillow town, they notice the inhabitants. People made entirely of pillows, with pillow bodies, limbs, and faces stitched onto their head pillows. These pillow people move in slow, gentle motions, as if every action takes just a bit more effort than it would in the real world. We see them going about what appears to be their daily routines, some entering pillow office buildings, others sitting at pillow cafes eating what looks like food but is actually smaller, differently colored pillows. Look at them all, Morty says, watching a pillow mother guiding two smaller pillow children across the street. They're just living their pillow lives. Rick observes the scene with growing concern. Notice something about how they talk? He asks, pointing to a group of pillow people having a conversation nearby. Morty listens, and we hear that the pillow people speak in soft, muffled voices that sound distant and oddly comforting, similar to hearing conversations through walls when you're falling asleep in your bedroom. Their words aren't completely clear, but the tone is soothing and familiar. They sound kinda nice, Morty says. Like when you're almost asleep and you can hear people talking in another room, but it's not loud enough to bother you. Exactly, Rick responds. This dimension is mimicking the auditory experience of falling asleep. Everything here is designed to lull you deeper into unconsciousness. The soft surroundings, the muffled sounds, the slow movements. It's trying to seduce us into complete sleep. As they continue walking through the pillow town, Rick stops suddenly, his eyes widening as he spots something ahead. Oh great, here comes the sales pitch, he mutters. Walking toward them are three pillow figures that, despite being made of stuffed fabric, are unmistakably versions of Beth, Summer, and Jerry. These pillow versions of their family members have the same general shapes and features, stitched onto their faces, but everything about them seems softer and more pleasant than their real counterparts. Morty! Dad! Calls Pillow Beth in a soft, muffled voice as they approach. Her pillow face has a serene smile stitched across it. We've been waiting for you. We have your pillow house already, Pillow Jerry adds, his voice lacking all of the real Jerry's insecurity and whining, replaced instead with calm confidence. It's perfect here, Pillow Summer says, her typical teenage sarcasm absent, replaced with genuine warmth. You never have to worry about anything again. Morty looks tempted, taking a step toward his pillow family. They seem nice, Rick. Maybe we could just stay a little while? Rick grabs Morty's shoulder, holding him back. This isn't real, Morty. These aren't our actual family members, they're manifestations created by this dimension to keep us here. His voice has an unusual edge of urgency. This is actually more dangerous than dimensions with obvious threats. This place wants us to give up, to surrender completely to sleep without maintaining the awareness we need to find our way home. The Pillow family members begin showing Rick and Morty around the town, pointing out increasingly appealing features of life in the Pillow dimension. Pillow Beth leads them to a massive pillow house with Sanchez Smith family stitched over the door. "Look how perfectly it's made for you," she says, gesturing inside where we see rooms that look exactly like their own bedrooms, but entirely constructed of the most comfortable-looking pillows imaginable. "You can rest here forever," Pillow Jerry says, his voice somehow even more soothing than before. "No more adventures, no more danger, no more exhaustion, just perfect, endless comfort." Pillow Summer shows Morty a room filled with pillow versions of video game consoles. "You can play all day without your hands ever getting tired," she explains. "The controllers are perfectly weighted pillows that respond to your thoughts more than your movements." We see Morty becoming increasingly drawn in, his resistance weakening with each new temptation. Even Rick seems momentarily entranced by a pillow laboratory where pillow versions of his scientific equipment wait for him. "This dimension represents the temptation to give in to sleep completely," Rick finally says, shaking himself out of the trance. "It's offering us the ultimate comfort trap, a place where all our desires are met with no effort required from us." The Pillow family's expressions change slightly, the stitched smiles becoming a bit more fixed and artificial, as they realize Rick is seeing through their illusion. "Why fight it?" Pillow Beth asks, her voice still soft but with a new hint of persuasion. "Isn't comfort what everyone ultimately wants? No pain, no struggle, just endless rest." "That's not living," Rick replies firmly. "That's just existing. Real life includes discomfort sometimes. Real sleep serves a purpose. It helps us recover so we can wake up and live again." He turns to Morty, who still looks tempted by the pillow world. "Morty, this isn't real. Remember why we need to get back. Real Beth, real Summer, even real Jerry are waiting for us." Morty looks torn, glancing between Rick and the Pillow family members who have now surrounded him with promises of eternal comfort. "But it feels so nice here, Rick." "That's the trap," Rick insists, grabbing Morty's arm. "It feels nice because it's designed to keep you here. But it's not real sleep that rejuvenates you. It's a prison that looks like a luxury hotel." With visible effort, Rick pulls Morty away from the Pillow family. The Pillow versions of Beth, Summer, and Jerry make one final attempt to convince them to stay, their voices becoming almost hypnotically soothing. "You'll always be tired in the real world," Pillow Jerry warns. "Always struggling, always fighting." "That's what makes being awake worth it," Rick counters, continuing to pull Morty away. As they retreat from the Pillow family, Rick spots a doorway at the end of the street that appears to be made of silk pillowcases, gently blowing in an unfelt breeze. "There's our exit, Morty. Focus on that, not on these fake comfort promises." Rick and Morty step through the silky doorway, and immediately the soft comfort of the Pillow dimension vanishes. They find themselves standing at the entrance of what appears to be a maze, but unlike any normal maze. The walls around them keep shifting and changing form. One moment they're made up of school lockers that look exactly like the ones from Morty's high school, complete with dents and graffiti that Morty recognizes. Then they transform into bedroom doors, some resembling Morty's own door at home. Other sections of the maze walls appear as bathroom stalls, classroom entrances, and even the doors to the Smith family garage. "What is this place?" Morty asks, his voice echoing slightly in the strange environment. The maze stretches out in all directions, with pathways that seem to rearrange themselves when not being directly observed. The lighting is dim, but not dark, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty rather than fear. "Based on the specific imagery, I'd say we've entered a dimension shaped by your anxiety, Morty," Rick explains, examining the constantly changing walls. "Notice how everything here is from your daily life? These are all transition points where you felt anxious before." Rick points to a section of wall that has transformed into the door of Principal Vagina's office. "School anxiety." He points to another section that looks like Jessica's locker. "Social anxiety." Then he gestures to a wall that resembles the entrance to an alien nightclub from one of their adventures. "Adventure-related anxiety." As Rick speaks, Morty begins to hear whispers. At first, they're barely audible, but they gradually become clearer. We see Morty turning his head, trying to locate the source of the sounds. Do you hear that? Morty asks nervously. Hear what? Rick responds, not seeming to notice anything unusual. The whispers grow slightly louder, and we can now make out what they're saying. They're Morty's own anxious thoughts, spoken in his voice but with a distant, echo-like quality. What if I fail the math test tomorrow? Jessica probably thinks I'm a total loser. What if Rick gets us killed on the next adventure? Mom and Dad fighting is probably my fault somehow. Morty's breathing quickens as he recognizes his own internal monologue being spoken aloud by the maze itself. Rick, the maze is saying all the stuff I worry about. At the same time, shadowy figures begin to appear at the edges of Morty's vision. When he turns to look directly at them, they seem to fade or move just out of sight. But in his peripheral vision, he can make out the shapes of his bullies from school, his teachers with disappointed expressions, and Jessica looking at him with confusion or possibly disgust. These figures never fully materialize but remain as dark silhouettes that move along the edges of the maze. Don't freak out, Morty, Rick says, noticing Morty's growing panic. This dimension is manifesting your anxiety, but remember, these are just echoes of your waking concerns. They can't actually harm you here. Rick looks more closely at the shadowy figures. Those are just projections from your subconscious. In the dream state, they have no real power unless you give it to them. Morty tries to calm down, but as his focus shifts from the whispers to the shadowy figures and back again, the maze itself begins to change more rapidly. The walls rearrange themselves, creating new pathways that seem to follow Morty's thought patterns. When he thinks about school, the maze creates corridors of lockers and classroom doors. When his mind shifts to worries about Jessica, the walls transform into school cafeteria scenes and hallways where he might encounter her. The maze is following my thoughts, Morty exclaims, watching as the environment responds to his shifting anxieties. Exactly, Rick nods. This is actually a pretty accurate representation of how anxiety works in the human brain. One anxious thought connects to another, creating pathways that can feel impossible to escape from. We see Rick studying the maze's movements with scientific interest. But there's something interesting about dream dimensions. They often contain their own solutions. Rick walks over to a section of the maze wall that currently resembles Morty's math classroom door, complete with a test paper pinned to it, showing a big red F. Watch this, Morty. I'm going to show you how to navigate this place. Rick stands directly in front of the door, looks at the failed test paper, and speaks in a calm, matter-of-fact voice. This is just a test. It represents a fear of failure, but it's not actually happening right now. And even if it did, it wouldn't define your entire worth as a person. As Rick acknowledges the fear without becoming emotionally entangled with it, something remarkable happens. The door begins to become transparent, the solid wood fading until it's just a ghostly outline that they can see through to the pathway beyond. Whoa! Morty exclaims. How did you do that? The technique works something like this, Rick explains, stepping through the now transparent door. You acknowledge the anxiety without engaging with it emotionally. You recognize it exists but don't let it control your response. In this dimension, that literally creates a path forward. Morty tries the technique himself, approaching a wall section that has transformed into his bedroom mirror, where one of the shadowy figures resembling a school bully seems to be laughing at him. Taking a deep breath, Morty looks directly at the mirror and speaks. I'm afraid of being laughed at and not being good enough, he says, his voice shaky at first but growing stronger. That's a real feeling I have, but right now, in this moment, I'm okay. This fear exists, but it doesn't have to control me. The mirror gradually becomes transparent, turning into a window he can step through. Morty looks amazed at what he's accomplished. He turns to Rick with a smile of genuine surprise. It worked. Keep going, Rick encourages. The more you practice this, the easier it gets. As they continue through the maze, Morty confronts more of his anxieties, acknowledging each one without being consumed by it. With each successful navigation, something interesting happens. The whispered, anxious thoughts that had been plaguing him begin to transform. Where once he heard, "You're going to fail that test," now he hears, "Studying more might help, but one test isn't everything." Where he'd heard, "Jessica thinks you're a loser," now comes, Jessica probably has her own insecurities too. The shadowy figures that had seemed so threatening also begin to change. As Morty acknowledges his fears about them, they become less dark and more transparent. The bullies no longer appear to be laughing at him, but instead look uncertain and small. The teacher's disappointed expressions shift to more neutral, patient looks. And the shadow of Jessica no longer appears to be judging him, but simply existing in her own space, concerned with her own thoughts. The maze is changing, Morty observes as they continue forward. You're changing how you relate to it, Rick corrects him. That's the key to dealing with anxiety, even in the waking world. You can't always make it disappear, but you can change your relationship to it. As they navigate deeper into the maze, they notice that the paths are becoming straighter and less confusing. The walls shift less frequently, and when they do change, the transitions are smoother and less jarring. The whispers grow quieter, still present but no longer overwhelming. The shadowy figures retreat further into the background, occasionally visible but no longer threatening. Eventually, they reach what appears to be the center of the maze. Here, in a small circular clearing, they find something unexpected. A tiny version of Morty, curled up asleep on what looks like a soft bed of calm blue light. This miniature Morty is sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed and untroubled. "What's that?" Morty asks, looking at his sleeping doppelganger. "That," Rick says with unusual gentleness, "is what you look like when your anxiety is properly processed. That's the calm that exists at your core when you're not being controlled by your fears." Rick points around them at the now stable maze. This whole dimension was teaching you, and anyone who might be listening, how to handle anxiety for better sleep. As they approach the sleeping mini Morty at the center of the anxiety maze, the small figure suddenly transforms into a door. Not an ordinary door, though. It's a perfect replica of the door to Rick's garage workshop, down to the oil stains and laser burns on its surface. Rick and Morty exchange glances before Rick shrugs and turns the knob, pushing the door open. They step through into what initially appears to be Rick's garage laboratory, but as they move further inside, the true nature of this dimension reveals itself. The space extends impossibly far in all directions, the familiar workbenches and shelves stretching out for what seems like miles. The ceiling towers high above them, disappearing into darkness, while the concrete floor extends outward like an endless sea. Every surface is covered with inventions, thousands upon thousands of them. Many recognizable from their adventures together, but many more that Morty has never seen before. "Where are we now?" Morty asks, turning in a slow circle to take in the vastness of the space. Rick doesn't answer immediately. He's staring at the nearest workbench, where a strange device sits glowing with a soft blue light. It resembles a helmet, connected to a small box covered in dials and readouts. A small label on its side reads, "Memory Restorer, Beta version 6. "We're in my subconscious laboratory," Rick finally says, his voice unusually quiet. "This is how my mind organizes itself during dream states." We see Rick looking uncomfortable as he watches Morty exploring the nearby area. Morty moves to another workbench where a different invention sits. This one looks like a small door frame standing about 3 feet tall. Inside the frame, a holographic image shows what appears to be a younger Rick holding a baby. The control panel attached to the side is labeled Dimensional Reunion Portal. "Rick, what are all these things?" "I've never seen most of these inventions before," Morty says, reaching out to touch the portal frame but hesitating before making contact. "That's because I never made them," Rick admits, walking slowly between the workbenches, his eyes moving from one invention to another. "Not in reality, anyway. These are things I've thought about creating but never did, or things I tried to make but failed." He picks up a small device that looks like a watch. "This one would have let me turn back time on a localized scale, just enough to undo small mistakes without creating time paradoxes." Morty moves deeper into the laboratory, noticing something strange about many of the inventions. Some of them appear to be broken or incomplete, with parts scattered across workbenches. But as he watches, the pieces slowly float back together, reassembling themselves. A shattered circuit board rebuilds itself chip by chip. A cracked power crystal repairs its fractures line by line. "Rick, look at this." "Everything broken is fixing itself," Morty calls out, pointing to a robot that's reattaching its own arm with careful, deliberate movements. Rick walks over, watching the self-repair process with an unreadable expression. This dimension represents my mind's attempt to process unresolved problems. In the waking world, I move from one invention to the next, often abandoning projects when they fail or become too difficult. But here, he gestures around them. My brain keeps working on the solutions even when I think I've given up. As they continue walking through the vast laboratory, Morty notices that the walls are not solid, but are instead made up of enormous screens, playing what look like memories. But unlike normal memories, these show events happening differently than how Morty remembers them. On one screen, Rick is carefully explaining a scientific concept to a younger Morty, who nods with understanding instead of looking confused. On another, Rick sits at the Smith family dinner table, engaged in pleasant conversation with Jerry instead of insulting him. A third shows Rick hugging Beth, telling her how proud he is of her accomplishments. These aren't real memories, Morty realizes aloud. They're alternate versions, Rick confirms, his eyes fixed on a screen showing him successfully saving Bird Person from his wedding disaster. Things that could have happened if I'd made different choices. He turns away from the screens, walking faster now. This is getting way too Freudian for my taste. Let's keep moving. As they move deeper into the laboratory, Morty notices that Rick's usual sarcastic commentary has almost completely disappeared. His grandfather walks with his hands in his pockets, occasionally stopping to look at an invention but saying very little. We see the discomfort on Rick's face as he confronts these physical manifestations of his innermost thoughts. You know, Rick, Morty says carefully, this place isn't actually scary like the anxiety maze was. It's kind of peaceful. He gestures to an invention nearby that appears to be constructing small planets inside glass spheres, each one teeming with tiny life forms. Everything here is about creating or fixing things. Rick stops in front of an invention that looks like a family portrait, but the frame contains actual moving, living versions of Beth, Summer, Morty, and even Jerry, all smiling and interacting with a holographic Rick who smiles back at them. The label on this device reads simply, Connection Sustainer. My mind works differently than most people's, Rick finally says, watching the tiny family in the frame. I process emotions through problems and solutions. Other people might dream about directly reconnecting with loved ones or reliving happy memories. I dream about inventing ways to fix what I've broken. He taps the frame, causing the image to ripple slightly. Even when I know some things can't really be fixed. Morty looks at Rick with new understanding. So all your cynicism and not caring about stuff in real life? Defense mechanisms, Rick finishes for him. Pretty obvious ones too. Dream Psychology 101. He shrugs, attempting to reclaim some of his usual detachment, but not quite succeeding. Of course I dream about solutions, that's what I do. I solve problems. My subconscious just focuses on the problems I pretend don't exist when I'm awake. As they continue walking, the nature of the inventions begins to change. The further they go, the simpler and more peaceful the devices become. Gone are the complex weapons and world-changing machines, replaced instead by inventions designed for comfort and connection. A small, flowering plant that blooms in response to emotions. A gentle anti-gravity field that creates the perfect sleeping environment. A communication device that translates feelings into colors, visible to others. These inventions are less complicated than your usual stuff, Morty observes as they pass a workbench containing what appears to be a simple music box that creates personalized melodies based on brainwave patterns. Easier solutions for simpler problems, Rick says, running his hand along the edge of a workbench. The deepest part of my mind knows that not everything needs a complex answer. Sometimes the most elegant solution is the simplest one. They finally reach what appears to be the center of the vast laboratory. Here, where all paths converge, stands a small, unassuming door. Unlike the elaborate inventions surrounding it, this door is simple in design, painted a soft blue color with just 2 words written on it in Rick's handwriting. Dreamcore. This is it, Rick says, stopping in front of the door. The nexus point connecting all the dream dimensions. Beyond this should be the central processing unit of the sleep inductor. which we can use to wake ourselves up. Morty reaches for the doorknob, but stops when Rick puts a hand on his shoulder. "Before we go in there," Rick says, looking back at the laboratory stretching out behind them, "I just want to be clear about something. If you ever mention anything you saw in this place when we're awake, I will literally invent a device that replaces all your memories of me with memories of Jerry giving you life advice. Got it?" Morty smiles. "Your secret optimism is safe with me, Rick." Rick rolls his eyes, but there's a hint of relief in his expression as he turns back to the door. "Let's get this over with." He reaches for the doorknob, but before he can turn it, the door begins to glow with a soft light, and 3 familiar silhouettes appear behind them. As Rick reaches for the doorknob of the Dream Core door, a soft blue light suddenly surrounds them, causing both Rick and Morty to turn around. Standing behind them are 3 familiar silhouettes that gradually come into focus. The Smith family has appeared, but not as their normal selves and definitely not like the pillow versions they encountered earlier. These dream versions of Beth, Summer, and Jerry look like their real counterparts, but with subtle differences that make them seem more idealized, yet somehow more authentic at the same time. "Oh great, more dream manifestations," Rick says, dropping his hand from the doorknob and facing the 3 figures. "Let me guess, you're here to delay us with some kind of emotional lesson before we can wake up?" Dream Beth steps forward first. She looks like the real Beth, but with a calming aura surrounding her, a soft blue glow that pulses gently like a heartbeat. Her eyes hold a depth of compassion that the waking Beth often keeps hidden beneath layers of insecurity and whine. "Hello, Dad." "Hello, Morty," Dream Beth says, her voice carrying the same tone as a real Beth, but with a soothing quality that makes both Rick and Morty feel instantly more relaxed. "I'm not here to delay you. I'm here to help you understand what you've been experiencing." "We all are," adds Dream Summer, moving to stand beside Dream Beth. This version of Summer has a gentle purple aura around her, and her typical teenage attitude is replaced with a serene confidence. Her eyes seem to sparkle with imagination and possibility. Each of us represents a different aspect of the sleep process that your minds need to understand. Dream Jerry is the last to step forward, and his appearance causes Rick to immediately scoff. Unlike the real Jerry, who often appears nervous and uncertain, Dream Jerry stands tall with a quiet dignity. A warm orange glow surrounds him, and his face holds a wisdom that the waking Jerry rarely displays. "Even you, Jerry. What sleep wisdom could you possibly have to offer?" Rick says, crossing his arms defensively. "More than you might think, Rick," Dream Jerry responds with a gentle smile, showing none of the usual hurt or defensiveness that Rick's comments typically provoke. "Sleep isn't just about brilliance or creativity, it's also about letting go." Morty looks between the 3 dream versions of his family members with fascination. "So you guys aren't really my family? You're like sleep concepts that look like them?" Dream Beth nods. "In a way, yes. Each person in your life represents different emotional connections in your subconscious. When you sleep, these connections transform into aspects of the rest process." She steps closer to Rick and Morty. "I represent the nurturing aspect of sleep, the part that helps heal your body and mind from daily stresses." We see Rick trying to maintain his disinterested expression, but something about Dream Beth's words seems to reach him. His posture relaxes slightly as she continues. "Sleep is when your emotional wounds begin to heal," Dream Beth explains. "The conflicts and stresses of your waking hours are processed and soothed. Without this aspect of sleep, emotional injuries would accumulate, eventually becoming too much to bear." Dream Summer steps forward next. "I represent the creative aspect of sleep, the part that helps you process new ideas and find inspiration." Her purple aura brightens as she speaks. During certain sleep cycles, your mind makes connections between thoughts and experiences that your waking mind might miss. That's where innovation comes from, where solutions to problems suddenly appear. "And what about you, Dream Jerry?" Morty asks, genuinely curious about what wisdom this version of his father might offer. Dream Jerry smiles, his orange aura warming the space around them. "I represent acceptance, perhaps the most important aspect of falling asleep. The willingness to let go of control, to acknowledge imperfection, and to trust that the world will continue spinning even when you're not consciously participating in it. Rick snorts at this. Of course, Jerry represents giving up. That tracks perfectly. It's not giving up, Rick, Dream Jerry responds without taking offense. It's recognizing limitations. Even the most brilliant mind needs rest. Fighting against that need only makes sleep more elusive. Morty notices something interesting happening as each family member speaks. The dream core door behind them responds to their presence, small sections of it lighting up with corresponding colors. Blue when Dream Beth speaks, purple for Dream Summer, and orange for Dream Jerry. Rick, look at the door, Morty says, pointing. I think they really are here to help us. Dream Beth extends her hands toward them. I offer you the gift of emotional healing, the ability to process your experiences without being consumed by them. A small blue orb of light forms between her palms. Dream Summer does the same, creating a purple orb. I offer you creative clarity, the ability to see connections and possibilities that exist beyond logical thought. Dream Jerry completes the trio, an orange orb floating above his hands. And I offer you acceptance of limitations, the understanding that rest is not weakness but necessary renewal. Rick looks at the three glowing orbs with suspicion, particularly eyeing Jerry's orange one with distaste. And what happens if we accept these so-called gifts? The dream core will open to you, Dream Beth explains. You'll be able to find your way back to wakefulness, carrying with you a deeper understanding of sleep's purpose. Morty reaches out without hesitation, touching the blue orb floating above Dream Beth's hands. The orb dissolves into particles of light that flow into him, and we see a brief montage of emotional memories, moments of connection with his family, conflicts resolved, fears faced, all processing rapidly and gently within him. His expression becomes more peaceful. Wow, that feels really good, Morty says, moving to Dream Summer's purple orb and experiencing a similar effect. This time, we see creative ideas and solutions flowing through his mind, connections forming between seemingly unrelated concepts. Rick still hesitates, especially as Morty approaches Dream Jerry's orange orb. Morty, do you really think accepting a gift of mediocrity from Jerry is a good idea? It's not mediocrity, Rick, Morty responds, touching the orange orb and feeling its effects. It's just being okay with not having to be in control of everything all the time. As the orange particles flow into him, we see Morty's shoulders relax completely, his expression becoming truly peaceful. You need all three aspects to truly rest, Rick, Dream Beth says gently. Even you. Rick looks at the three Dream family members, then at Morty's peaceful expression, and finally at the Dream Core door, which now has three sections glowing, but still remains closed. With a resigned sigh, he reaches out and quickly touches all three orbs in succession. Fine, whatever. Let's get this over with, he mutters. But we see the effects washing over him despite his reluctance. The blue light soothes the perpetual tension in his face. The purple light brings a spark of wonder to his eyes, and the orange light, Jerry's gift, causes the tightness in his shoulders to release for perhaps the first time. As the last of the light particles are absorbed, the Dream Core door fully illuminates, now pulsing with a rhythm that resembles gentle breathing. The three Dream family members begin to fade. Remember what you've learned here, Dream Beth says, as she becomes translucent. The mind needs creativity as much as rest, Dream Summer adds, her form growing fainter. And sometimes, Dream Jerry says, already almost gone, letting go is the strongest thing you can do. As the three disappear completely, the Dream Core door swings open on its own, revealing a softly glowing blue light from within. Ready? Morty asks, looking much more at peace than when their journey began. Rick looks at him, then at the open door. Yeah, he says simply, something new in his voice, a quietness that wasn't there before. Together, they step through the threshold into the Dream Core. Rick and Morty step through the glowing blue doorway, and the world around them transforms completely. The Dream Core opens up before them, stretching out in all directions like a vast cosmic library. We see them standing on what appears to be a transparent floor that glows with soft blue light, extending infinitely in every direction. Above them, below them, and all around, countless glowing orbs float gently through the space, each one containing what looks like a miniature moving scene. Dreams captured in perfect, living detail. "Whoa," Morty says softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he turns in a complete circle, taking in the incredible sight. "What is this place?" "This has to be the central nexus of all dream dimensions," Rick replies, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his usual cynicism. "Some kind of cosmic storage system for dreams from across the multiverse." He reaches out toward one of the nearby orbs, which drifts closer to his outstretched hand. Inside, we can see what appears to be a tiny version of a Gromflamite soldier riding a unicorn through a field of talking flowers. As they watch the orbs drifting around them, subtle pulses of light begin to appear in the space between the spheres. These pulses grow more organized, forming patterns that remind Morty of constellations or complex molecular structures. The patterns of light begin to coalesce into vaguely humanoid shapes, beings made entirely of luminous energy that shift and flow rather than maintaining fixed forms. "Rick, are those people?" Morty asks, pointing to the nearest light formation. "Not exactly," Rick says, studying the beings with open fascination. "They look like pure consciousness entities. No physical form, just thought and awareness existing as energy patterns." One of the light beings approaches them, its form rippling and flowing like water made of soft golden light. Though it has no mouth, a gentle voice seems to emanate from it, felt in their minds rather than heard with their ears. "Welcome to the Dream Repository," the being communicates. "Few conscious minds ever reach this place while still maintaining their waking identity." The being's form shifts slightly, expanding to gesture at the countless orbs floating around them. "We are the custodians of dreams." More of the light beings approach, each one a different color, some blue, others purple, green, or silver. They surround Rick and Morty, but there's nothing threatening about their presence. Instead, they radiate a sense of ancient peace and purpose. "What exactly do you guys do here?" Morty asks, finding himself unusually calm in the presence of these strange beings. The first golden being responds, its light pulsing with each thought it communicates. "We collect and preserve dreams from all conscious beings across all dimensions. Dreams are not merely random neural firings or subconscious musings. They are essential components of consciousness itself." A blue light being moves closer. "Dreams connect all thinking beings to the universal patterns of existence. Without dreams, consciousness would become fragmented, unable to process experience into meaning." Rick looks skeptical but interested. "So you're saying dreams serve an actual cosmic function? They're not just evolutionary byproducts of sleep cycles?" "Dreams exist before evolution recognized their value," a silver being responds. "Consciousness dreams because it must, not because bodies evolved to do so. The physical mechanisms evolved to support what consciousness already required." As they talk, some of the floating dream orbs begin to drift closer to Rick and Morty. Looking more carefully, they realize these particular orbs contain familiar scenes. Morty recognizes one containing himself flying through the air during their adventure in the Whispering Woods just hours earlier. Another shows Rick as a much younger man, holding what appears to be baby Beth. "These are our dreams," Morty says, reaching out to touch an orb that contains a scene of him asking Jessica to the school dance, something that never happened in reality. "All of your dreams are preserved here," the Golden Custodian confirms. "Every fear, hope, random thought pattern, and adventure your minds have created while unconscious. They form part of the greater pattern of all dreams." Rick studies the orbs containing his own dreams with unusually careful attention, his expression unreadable. We see him watching scenes from his past, alternate versions of choices he made, and strange adventures his mind created while sleeping. "So why are we here?" Rick finally asks, turning back to the custodians. "My sleep inductor malfunctioned and somehow connected us to the dream dimensions. Was that just random chance?" The custodians' lights pulse in what might be their version of laughter. "There are no malfunctions in the realm of dreams, only purposes not yet understood," the golden being explains. Your device worked exactly as it needed to, bringing you here because you both required understanding. Understanding of what? Morty asks. A purple custodian floats forward. For you, Morty Smith, the journey through the dream dimensions was necessary to show you how your anxieties can be processed peacefully. The being gestures to several orbs that show Morty's progress through the anxiety maze. You learn techniques that will allow your waking mind to rest more completely during sleep cycles. Morty nods, realizing the truth in the custodian's words. He does feel different after navigating the anxiety maze, like he's gained tools for handling his constant worries. The custodians turn their attention to Rick. And you, Rick Sanchez, the golden being continues, needed to remember that even the most brilliant mind requires proper rest. Dreams are not merely biological functions, but essential processing tools that even genius cannot replace with technology. Rick crosses his arms defensively. So you're saying my sleep inductor was actually supposed to bring us here all along? That this whole interdimensional sleep journey was just an elaborate lesson about the importance of getting enough sleep? Not just about sleep, a green custodian corrects. About understanding the nature of dreams themselves. Your device was not created merely to help Jerry Smith find rest, though that was your conscious intention. Your subconscious mind created it to help all of you understand healthy dreaming. Your entire family struggles with proper rest, the blue custodian adds. Beth dreams of validation she never received. Summer dreams of identity separate from family pressure. Jerry dreams of confidence he cannot find while awake. And you, Rick, rarely allow yourself to dream at all, using substances and distractions to avoid the processing your mind requires. Rick looks uncomfortable with this assessment, but doesn't argue against it. We see him glancing at an orb containing a peaceful scene of the entire Smith family having dinner together without fighting. Clearly one of his own dreams. So what happens now? Morty asks. Can we just wake up and go home? The custodians flow together, their light forms merging briefly before separating again. You have two choices, the golden being explains. You may return to wakefulness now, carrying the understanding you have gained through your journey. Or you may visit one final dream dimension before waking, a realm specifically designed to facilitate peaceful sleep. What's in this special sleep dimension? Rick asks, his scientific curiosity evident. It is a place where the conditions for perfect rest exist, a silver custodian explains. A dimension that responds to each individual's ideal sleep environment. Many who visit never wish to leave, but we would ensure your return to wakefulness after experiencing its benefits. Rick and Morty look at each other, clearly considering the options. The countless dream orbs continue to float around them, each one containing moments of fear, joy, wonder, and every other emotion dreaming minds can experience. What do you think, Morty? Rick asks, surprisingly willing to let his grandson have input on the decision. Head home now, or check out the ultimate sleep dimension first. Morty looks around at the vast dream core one more time, then at the patient, glowing forms of the custodians waiting for their decision. I think we've come this far, he says. Might as well see what perfect sleep feels like before we go back. The golden custodian waves what might be considered a hand, and the vast expanse of the dream core begins to fade around Rick and Morty. The countless orbs of dreams and the glowing custodians dissolve into mist, which then reshapes itself into something entirely new. We see Rick and Morty standing in what appears to be a blank white space that slowly begins to transform around them, responding to something deep within their minds. For Morty, the white space gradually forms into the perfect bedroom. It's similar to his actual room at home, but with subtle improvements that make it ideal for sleeping. The lighting dims to a soft blue glow that doesn't strain the eyes but provides just enough visibility to make out the shapes of familiar objects. The temperature adjusts to that perfect level of coolness that makes snuggling under blankets feel especially satisfying. Outside the window, gentle rain begins to fall, creating a soothing patter against the glass without the harshness of thunder or wind. Rick, standing just a few feet away from Morty, experiences something completely different. For him, the dimension manifests as an alien hilltop underneath an impossibly vast sky filled with stars and colors that don't exist on Earth. A hammock made of material that looks like woven starlight hangs between two strange crystalline trees. A gentle breeze carries scents that remind Rick of places he visited decades ago, back when the universe still surprised him regularly. Rick?" Morty says, looking around at his cozy bedroom. "What exactly are you seeing right now?" "Because I'm back in my room somehow." Rick glances over at Morty while running his hand along the edge of his hammock. "I'm on a hill on Zendrock 7, or at least a perfect recreation of it. This dimension is adapting to what each of us considers the ideal sleep environment." Rick actually looks impressed, which is a rare expression for him. Pretty advanced technology, if you can even call it technology. It's probably more like the dream equivalent of psychic manifestation. Morty walks across what he perceives as his bedroom floor, while from Rick's perspective, Morty is walking across alien grass that glows softly with each step. "So we're in the same place but seeing completely different things? That's wild." "Not just seeing," Rick explains, settling into his hammock, which rocks gently without any push. "We're experiencing different environments tuned specifically to our individual sleep preferences. The dimension is reading our brainwave patterns and creating perfect customized sleep spaces." Rick closes his eyes for a moment, clearly enjoying the gentle rocking of the hammock. Morty sits on the edge of what he perceives as his bed, running his hand over the covers that feel somehow softer than his actual bedding at home. "This feels so real. The blankets are perfectly warm but not hot. And listen to that rain. It's exactly the sound I use on my white noise app, but somehow better." As they settle into their personalized environments, both Rick and Morty notice something happening. Without saying anything or making any adjustments, the dimension begins to fine-tune itself to their needs. For Morty, the pillow beneath his head reshapes slightly to support his neck in exactly the right way. The rain sounds adjust their pattern, becoming even more soothing. A faint scent of lavender fills the air. Not overwhelming, just enough to create a sense of calm. For Rick, the stars above him shift into constellations that correspond to some of his happiest memories. The breeze adjusts to the perfect temperature, and the hammock's gentle rocking synchronizes with his breathing pattern. A soft humming sound begins, reminiscent of the engine noise from his favorite spaceship, but mellowed into a soothing lullaby. "It's reading our minds," Rick says, his voice unusually soft and lacking its typical sharp edge. "Adjusting in real time to maximize relaxation based on our brain's feedback. This place isn't just responding to what we think we want, it's figuring out what we actually need." Morty has stretched out on his bed now, his body sinking into the perfectly supportive mattress. "This is nothing like the pillow dimension, Rick. That place felt like it was trying to trap us by making us never want to leave. This feels different somehow." "That's because this dimension isn't trying to trap us," Rick explains, his eyes half closed as he gazes up at the alien stars. "The pillow dimension was offering an escape from reality, a permanent alternative to waking life. This place is designed to enhance sleep itself, to make it as effective and refreshing as possible before returning to wakefulness." As they continue to relax into their environments, both Rick and Morty notice their thoughts beginning to slow down. Not in the confused way that happens when falling asleep in the real world, but in a structured, peaceful manner. Each thought completes itself fully before the next one begins. Worries that would normally spiral into anxiety simply present themselves, are acknowledged, and then fade away naturally without effort. "My brain feels different," Morty says, his voice becoming sleepier but still maintaining clarity. "Like I'm thinking more clearly but also thinking less, if that makes any sense." "It's teaching us how to achieve hypnagogic consciousness," Rick replies, the scientific term rolling off his tongue despite his relaxed state. "The transitional state between wakefulness and sleep, where the mind is deeply relaxed but still maintaining a thread of awareness. Most people pass through this state too quickly to notice it or learn from it." The dimension continues to adjust around them, responding to even the subtlest shifts in their brain patterns. For Morty, the room darkens slightly as his eyelids grow heavier. The rain sounds incorporate a faint, rhythmic pattern that matches his slowing heartbeat. For Rick, the starlight dims to a perfect viewing brightness, and the hammock's material seems to merge with his body, eliminating any pressure points or discomfort. "The really interesting thing," Rick continues, his voice now barely above a whisper, is that this state is actually achievable in our normal sleeping environment too. This dimension is basically giving us a perfect template of what ideal sleep feels like, so our bodies and minds can remember it when we return to reality. Morty feels his consciousness hovering at the perfect balance point between sleep and wakefulness. He's aware enough to appreciate the peaceful feeling, but relaxed enough that all tension has left his body. Do you think we'll be able to sleep better after this? Like, will our bodies remember how this feels? That's probably the whole point, Rick replies, his usual sarcasm completely absent. Sleep isn't just about losing consciousness. It's about achieving the right kind of rest. This dimension is basically giving us a masterclass in how to let go of waking concerns and embrace the sleep state properly. As they drift deeper into this peaceful state, both Rick and Morty begin to feel a subtle change, a gentle pulling sensation that suggests their time in this dimension is coming to its natural conclusion. Not in a jarring or abrupt way, but as a natural progression, like the end of a perfect meal or the final notes of a beautiful song. "I think we're starting to wake up," Morty murmurs, noticing how his perfect bedroom is beginning to take on a slightly transparent quality, the edges of the dream becoming softer. "Yeah," Rick agrees, watching as some of the stars above him begin to fade. "But we're taking something back with us. This feeling, this understanding of what real rest feels like. That was the gift of this dimension." As the peaceful dimension continues to fade around them, neither Rick nor Morty fights against the transition. Instead, they carry the profound sense of calm with them, maintaining that perfect balance between awareness and surrender as they begin the journey back to wakefulness, back to their bodies still lying on the garage floor, but carrying with them an understanding of sleep that most people never achieve. As Rick and Morty continue to experience the peaceful dimension, they begin to notice subtle changes around them. For Rick, the starry sky above his hammock starts to ripple slightly, the perfect constellation shifting and blurring at the edges. For Morty, his ideal bedroom walls occasionally flicker, briefly showing glimpses of the anxiety maze or the whispering woods before returning to normal. They're starting to wake up, but not in the gentle, controlled way they expected. "Something's happening, Rick," Morty says, sitting up in his bed as the walls around him continue to flicker more frequently. "I think we're waking up, but it feels kind of wrong." Rick quickly sits up in his hammock, his scientific mind immediately analyzing the situation. The sleep inductor must be malfunctioning again back in the real world. The waking process is happening too fast, causing instability in the dream dimensions. As he speaks, a section of the alien hillside beneath him temporarily transforms into the pillow landscape before snapping back. This could get messy if we don't control it. Morty starts to panic as his bedroom ceiling suddenly opens up to reveal the reverse gravity planet above him. "What do we do? Is this going to hurt? Are we going to get stuck between dimensions or something?" "Stay calm, Morty," Rick says firmly, getting up from his hammock, which is now partially transformed into one of the workbenches from his subconscious laboratory. "Remember what we learned in the peaceful dimension? We need to maintain that same mental state even as everything falls apart around us." We see Morty take a deep breath, visibly trying to hold on to the sense of calm he experienced earlier. The rate of dimensional bleeding slows slightly in response to his efforts, though it doesn't stop completely. His bedroom walls still occasionally show glimpses of other dream landscapes, but the transitions become less jarring. "That's it," Rick encourages, his own environment similarly stabilizing somewhat. "The dream dimensions respond to our emotional state. The calmer we stay, the more control we have over the transition." Rick closes his eyes for a moment, concentrating. When he opens them again, there's a new determination in his expression. "I think I can fix this. The dream course showed me how the sleep inductor actually works on a quantum level. I should be able to reprogram it from in here." "From inside the dream? Is that even possible?" Morty asks, watching as Rick begins making motions with his hands as if manipulating invisible controls. "It's all about brainwave patterns, Morty. The sleep inductor reads and influences them, right? Well, we're essentially pure brainwave patterns right now, which means we can communicate directly with the device if I can just find the right frequency." Rick continues making precise gestures in the air, his fingers moving with incredible speed and accuracy. The dream landscape around them continues to shift and blur, elements from all the dimensions they visited bleeding into one another. We see trees with faces from the whispering woods growing out of pillow ground, while anxiety-inducing shadows drift through the peaceful space. Despite the chaos, Rick maintains his concentration, and Morty does his best to stay calm. "What exactly are you doing?" Morty asks, watching Rick's strange movements. "I'm mentally reconfiguring the sleep inductor to create a gentle awakening pattern instead of the abrupt one it's trying to force right now," Rick explains without pausing his work. "Think of it like reprogramming a computer, except the computer is our shared dream state, and the code is pure thought." As Rick works, we see elements from all their previous dream adventures not just appearing but beginning to interact in strange ways. The balloon creatures from the reverse gravity planet float through the anxiety maze corridors, while pillow people sit in Rick's subconscious laboratory inventions. The dream world is collapsing in on itself, the boundaries between separate dimensions dissolving completely. "Remember the gifts from the dream versions of your family," Rick tells Morty as the chaos increases. "Beth's emotional healing, Summer's creative clarity, and even Jerry's acceptance thing. Focus on those now." Morty closes his eyes, concentrating on the 3 colored orbs of light he received from the dream versions of his family. We see a subtle blue, purple, and orange glow surrounding him as he does this. The chaotic dream elements nearest to him seem to calm slightly, arranging themselves in less threatening patterns. Rick has his eyes closed now too, his hands still moving but more slowly and deliberately. "I'm almost there," he mutters. The inductor's base code is surprisingly elegant. Whoever designed this thing really understood the mechanics of consciousness transfer. "Wait a minute." His eyes snap open. "I designed this thing. Of course it's elegant." Just when it seems like the dream dimensions might completely collapse around them, 3 familiar glowing forms appear. The custodians from the dream core, their light bodies now flickering and unstable in the deteriorating dream space. "You are returning to wakefulness," the golden custodian says, its voice sounding distant and echoing. "But remember, you can return to these dream dimensions naturally during sleep if you maintain the awareness you've gained." "Yeah, thanks for the tip," Rick responds, still focused on his invisible reprogramming work. "Any chance you guys could help stabilize this mess while I finish?" The custodians pulse with light, and the chaotic dream elements around Rick and Morty slow their frantic shifting. "We cannot prevent your waking," the blue custodian explains, "but we can ease the transition briefly." With this momentary stability, Rick makes a final series of gestures and then claps his hands together decisively. "Got it? I've reprogrammed the sleep inductor to create a gentle waking cycle. We should transition back to our bodies smoothly now instead of getting jerked back all at once." The dream world around them has stopped its chaotic shifting and now begins to fade gradually, growing transparent rather than breaking apart. Through the fading dream landscape, they can start to see faint outlines of the garage and their own bodies lying on the floor. "So this actually worked out pretty well," Morty says, looking around at the gently dissolving dream world. "We learned all about sleep and dreams, visited some pretty cool dimensions, and figured out how to get back safely." "Yeah, I guess it wasn't a total disaster," Rick admits reluctantly. The dream dimensions are actually pretty fascinating from a scientific perspective. The way they manifest subconscious processes as physical environments, the consistent internal logic despite the apparent randomness. "I might actually sleep better after understanding all this." He immediately adds, "Not that I had trouble sleeping before. I just chose not to because sleep is for people who aren't working on stuff that actually matters." The custodians begin to fade, along with the rest of the dream world. "Until you dream again, Rick Sanchez and Morty Smith," the golden one says, before disappearing completely. As the final dream elements dissolve around them, Rick and Morty feel a gentle pulling sensation, like being carried on a calm current back to their physical forms. There's no jarring transition, no sensation of falling or being forced. Instead, they float peacefully back to consciousness, the dream world fading away like mist in morning sunlight. "Remember what we learned, Morty," Rick says, his voice growing more distant as they separate back into their individual consciousness. Dreams aren't just random brain garbage. They're important processing tools with actual purpose. "Yeah, I'll remember," Morty promises as the last of the dream world fades away. The peaceful feeling from the final dimension stays with them through the transition, creating a perfect bridge between the dream state and wakefulness, guiding them gently back to their bodies, still lying on the garage floor, surrounded by the faint remnants of the purple mist that started their journey. Rick and Morty's eyes open simultaneously, both of them lying on the garage floor exactly where they collapsed. The purple mist from the sleep inductor has completely dissipated, leaving only a faint smell like lavender in the air. Rick checks his watch and looks surprised. "We've only been out for like 6 minutes, he tells Morty as they both sit up. "Felt like hours in there." Over the next few days, Rick quietly modifies his sleep inductor and leaves it in each family member's room while they're out. "I just want everyone to shut up about being tired all the time," he insists when Morty catches him. "Your eyelids are getting heavy now. Imagine your own perfect sleep dimension waiting for you."